Chapter 170. The Taoist with the sword on his back laughed. Senior brother, I know one of your ancestors likes to go to brothels, so there's this rule when choosing disciples. And it's not a big deal. At least they dare to do what they want and aren't bound by the rules of the world. But why did you choose 4 Kuan cultivators later? Are you planning to open a brothel in the snowy dome? Senior brother Chung laughed and scolded. Open a brothel, my ass. The sect is very strict in this area. The ancestor's problem can be done by him, but the subordinates may not be able to do it. Recently, the sect's atmosphere has been very strict. It's to strike a group of people who talk about how the ancestor can't do what we can't do. I chose these Kuan cultivators because I don't expect them to have any great prospects in the future. That's all uncertain. Who can say for sure? But since I'm here, even if I can't find a few with real potential, at least I can pick a few wives for the subordinates. It's considered a bit of a contribution, right? The ratio of heaven and earth in the dome is seriously imbalanced. The higher-ups said to bring a few Kuan cultivators back. Everyone can digest it by themselves in the sect. Chao Wendao walked more and more relaxed. He felt that he had adjusted himself to the best state. His body and mind were both at the peak. Nothing could stop his footsteps, not a single person. After crossing the slope, he saw the heaven's chosen one standing alone about 10 feet away, looking into the distance. He didn't stop walking. His sleeves fluttered, and the talismans in his sleeves were ready to be activated. Wendao came in the night to borrow something from Brother. I wonder if Brother is willing to part with it? As he spoke, the talismans were sent out consecutively. Poor Lu Xiaoyi, ever since he entered the Foundation establishment realm, had no cultivation methods to learn, no secret techniques to teach, and no place to buy talismans. He was simply a layman who had entered the Foundation establishment realm in name, but his knowledge was still stuck at the chi-eating stage. He didn't expect the Foundation establishment technique talismans to be so far and so fast. It was so fast that before he could react, 2 powerful binding techniques had already taken effect under his feet. One was the single-target vine technique. Several old vines suddenly stretched out from the soil and tightly wrapped around his legs. He couldn't move at all. The other was the soul shock technique. It could cause the opponent's spirit to surge, making them unable to control themselves for a short period of time. Their consciousness would be in chaos, and their reactions would be slow. Once the 2 techniques were used, the opponent immediately became a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. He even asked in a daze, "Borrow what?" The progress was so smooth that Chao Wendao was filled with lofty sentiments. "I want to borrow your head." In an instant, he closed in on Zhang Xian, and with a flash of his sword, Zhang Xian's head fell to the ground. In the sky above the plateau, the Taoist with the sword case on his back laughed loudly. "I didn't expect this." The dignified Yuanying Taoist Temple's Foundation establishment deathmatch actually guessed the beginning correctly, but guessed the end incorrectly. Senior brother Chung smiled bitterly and shook his head. He was the same. He thought that the fool was dead for sure, but he never thought that he would make such a comeback. None of them had any intention of making a move. To a swordsman, this was a daily occurrence. What was there to be surprised about? Looking at the scene again, the idiot was breathing heavily with his back turned, as if the smell of blood was the most nourishing thing in the world. Moreover, his body was rocking back and forth, as if he was immersed in pleasure. This freak, the Taoist with the sword case on his back, scolded jokingly. Then, he said with a calm expression, "Senior brother, your disciple is dead. Of course, this person would replace him. How about I give you 2 disciples in exchange? 3 is fine too." Senior brother Chung sneered. "Do you think I'm blind? This kid is sinister enough, ruthless enough, steady enough. He has some of the style of our dome sect. But the key is still that sword. That can only be wielded by a real sword seed. I dare say that with just this sword, none of the hundreds of Foundation establishment cultivators below can block his edge. I can give you anything: Way Sword Mountain, spiritual vigor, artifacts, resources, women. But I can't give up this kind of disciple." The Taoist with the sword case curled his lips. "You can give up anything. I've known you for hundreds of years. but you've never given up anything." The vines disappeared without a trace after losing the support of his magic power. As for his mind, with his current mental strength, how could he be affected? Lu Xiaoyi wiped the blood off his face. There was nothing he could do. His body was fixed in place, and he couldn't dodge. Therefore, he fainted for a longer time than usual. "Are you an idiot?" he muttered softly. "Competing with him in swords? Wasn't that courting death?" He had wielded the sword for close to 10 years, and his sword aura and sword aura were all gone. How could a person who occasionally played close combat compare to him? This kind of person didn't have the talent to cultivate magic. If it was him, he would have used spells and talismans to attack from afar. That was the right way to cultivate magic. Yet after being fixed, he came close to him, took off his pants, and let out his breath. It was an unnecessary move. He sounded relaxed, but in fact he was still afraid. He had a premonition about such an open attack. Everyone had a group of luck chasers. Even someone as gentle as him wanted to swallow the other party's luck chasers to strengthen himself. There was no need to ask what the other party would think. The reason why he chose such a remote place was to lure the other party here, so that he could settle the matter once and for all. He had thought it through. If the other party didn't come, it meant that he had good intentions. He wouldn't look for him either. Everyone would hold on to their remaining luck and live their lives. "You're good. I'm good. Everyone's good." But if the other party really wanted to come, then he wouldn't mind making his own luck chaser stronger. His plan was good, but he underestimated the talisman ability of the low-level world's foundation establishment cultivators. Not only was the distance of the talisman far beyond his imagination, but the power was so great that he couldn't move. He fell into a dead end at the beginning, and all his preparations were useless. But he didn't know what was wrong with this guy. The purpose of the trap was to get close to him. He was puzzled, but it didn't delay his actions. He looked around and found that he didn't attract anyone's attention. Only then did he put down his thumping heart. The low-level world he was in was really too low-level. Moreover, he was an itinerant cultivator and didn't have a proper education, so he didn't have an accurate understanding of yuanying. He thought that if others didn't see him, they didn't know. He didn't know that 7 pairs of eyes were staring at him from above. The corpse was a big problem. If he casually threw it away, he would definitely be discovered. He still had this bit of common sense. Therefore, he stuffed Chao Wendao's corpse into his own storage pouch. This way, the stench of blood would not spread. After a night, or even longer, when the airship was repaired, it would most likely dissipate, right? He didn't take any of the items, afraid that the other party would find him in some mysterious way. There were too many high-level cultivators here, so he had to be careful. Then, he quickly dug a deep pit and buried the rest of the guy's storage ring, storage bag, spirit beast bag, and sword-shaped talisman. Then, he smoothed the surrounding ground and tried to make it less abnormal. After everything was arranged properly, he still felt uneasy after walking a few steps. So, he turned back and lay on the ground to carefully sense if there were any fluctuations of spiritual vigor. Fortunately, he couldn't feel it, but he still didn't feel at ease. He couldn't feel it, but it didn't mean that the high-level cultivators couldn't feel it. So, he thought of a clever idea. Since this place was likely to be noticed by others, why not add something to it, so that people wouldn't want to investigate it? He took off his pants. He hadn't relieved himself for more than a year. This was his first release, and it was really satisfying. He relieved himself like a waterfall. What a big waterfall! It was piled up on the top of the pit. Now, no one would come to dig this place, right? While enjoying himself, he examined the cluster of luck in his sea of consciousness. Well, it was a lot bigger, which was a pleasant surprise. Chapter 171. In the sky, the sword-carrying Taoist laughed until he fell down. "Senior brother, this person actually dared to shit on your Xuanyuan's keepsake. I think you can't keep him. It's too disrespectful. Give him to my Wei Sword Mountain. You can take all 10 of my disciples. How about it? I'm a good brother, right?" Senior brother Chung was unmoved. "What's this? The old ancestor is still shitting on the flying peak. We don't care about this. Young people, just educate them. We still have to give them a chance." The flying boat was repaired in the afternoon of the second day. The cultivators from both sides bid farewell and boarded the boats separately, as if nothing had happened. Lu Xiaoyi also acted as if nothing had happened, queuing up to board the boat. When it was his turn, Taoist Zhonghua, who had been standing in front of the cabin door in a daze, reached out and stopped him. "Exalted Master, is there something wrong? This disciple didn't do anything wrong, right?" Zhonghua looked at him with a complicated expression. He originally thought that he was a young master sheep, but he didn't know that he was actually a vicious wolf. He pointed at the black floating raft not far away. "Lu Xiaoyi, what a load of sh*t. The place you boarded the boat is over there, but not here. You're on your own." Lu Xiaoyi understood what was going on the moment he heard it, but he didn't explain or complain. He had to bear the consequences of his own actions. There was nothing to say. He bowed deeply to Taoist Zhonghua, turned around, and silently walked towards the black floating raft under the astonished gazes of the surrounding Foundation establishment cultivators. Behind him came Taoist Zhonghua's voice transmission that was specially directed at him. "Lu Xiaoyi, don't forget Junior 3, and don't forget Chaowang. They're all your homes. When you become rich one day, remember to come back and take a look." Lu Xiaoyi didn't even turn his head. Become rich? Come back and take a look? Was he going to donate a road and set up a school? He was like a clay bodhisattva crossing a river. He couldn't even protect himself. He boarded the raft normally. No one said anything to him, as if everything was normal, as if he was Chao Wendao. In fact, the space of this floating raft was much bigger than the one in Chaowang World. It wasn't bigger as a whole, but the independent space of each cultivator. Yes, they had their own independent space. Comparing the two floating rafts, the Morning Light flying raft was 500 feet long and had more than 10 stories high. It was extremely bloated. On the other hand, the Five Rings flying raft was less than 300 feet long and had 2 stories high. It was extremely slender and robust. Back then, the Morning Light flying ship could carry close to 300 people, while the Fifth Ring floating raft could carry 60 people. Based on pure volume, the flying ship should have more space per person than the floating raft. But now it seemed to be the opposite. After careful observation, Lu Xiaoyi and the rest of the Foundation establishment cultivators quickly discovered the secret. The inside of the Five Rings floating raft was very simple. There wasn't a single trace of decoration. Every piece of furniture was necessary for practicality. However, it didn't have the flashy Chaowang flying ship. That was a waste of space. The interior of the floating raft had obviously been modified. Furthermore, it was a recent modification. Some simple partitions were used to build 60 independent spaces. It could be said that the space within the raft was utilized to the extreme. It was as if aside from the control room, everything else was occupied by the Foundation establishment cultivators. The Morning Light flying ship was different. There were more than 10 stories on the deck, but only 3 stories were open for the Foundation establishment cultivators from the 3 cultivation worlds to live in. Then, what about the other 7 and 8 stories? There was no need to think about it. It was definitely a resting place for high-level cultivators. It would definitely be large, luxurious, and imposing. There would be a restaurant, a wine cellar, and a place for personal cultivation. Wasn't this expected? They were upper realm cultivators. Their statuses were completely different. There was nothing wrong with treating them like refugees. However, on the Five Rings floating raft, there wasn't any luxurious space. Instead, it was all allocated to the Foundation establishment cultivators. Furthermore, there was indeed a toilet. How did they know that this floating raft didn't have any luxurious space for upper realm cultivators? It wasn't just because every Foundation establishment cultivator had their own independent space. In theory, it was impossible for other spaces to exist. Most importantly, apart from the one controlling the raft, the remaining five rings yuanying were flying together outside. They gave up their own space and handed it over to the insignificant Foundation establishment cultivators. They would rather waste their magic power and fly in the void of the universe with their physical bodies. Was it because of their love for their juniors? Was it a tradition of the Five Rings? Or was it because they could cultivate at any time? In any case, no matter which reason it caused the Foundation establishment cultivators to be moved. Even if the Five Rings cultivators were really a group of bandits, they were still a group of self-disciplined bandits. A group of bandits who didn't just talk about contributing to the sect. They were also bandits who did it with their actions. In order to nurture little bandits, they would rather suffer grievances. They deserved to be cowardly tortoises in Chowang realm for tens of thousands of years. If they had even a fraction of the Five Rings cultivator style, they wouldn't be so weak. This was merely the beginning of the trip. Nobody even said half a word. Out of the 60 Foundation establishment cultivators, 59 of them were already convinced. They already faintly hoped that they, too, could become a member of this powerful force. Only one person curled his lips. Insignificant skill. Wasn't it just arranging for them to sit in the special seat for the elderly, women, and children on the bus? What was so new about it that they were moved to this extent? A group of country bumpkins who hadn't seen the world. This kind of feeling didn't last long. Finally, a Foundation establishment cultivator thought of a very serious problem. He had once heard the cultivators of Chowang realm mention that the Five Rings cultivators were about 200 years away from Chowang realm. In that case, by the time they flew to the Five Rings, how many of these Foundation establishment cultivators would still be alive? This problem was very vexing, causing the Foundation establishment cultivators to feel uneasy. But soon, a voice rang out in the raft. We'll reach the Five Rings in a year and a half. This isn't something you should be concerned about. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. As the only one who had been brought onto the pirate ship, he didn't even have the heart to struggle now. Where had he exposed himself? He was too lazy to think about it, but there were definitely loopholes everywhere. Even Taoist Chong Huan knew about his shitty story. What else did the Yuanying not know? He would just have to make do with it. He also knew that the people of the Five Rings cultivators wouldn't really do anything to him. The people he killed weren't from the Five Rings cultivators, nor were they real Five Rings cultivators. They were just pitiful people from a low-level cultivation world. Now it was someone else. Perhaps he would be next? But he knew that it would be more difficult to be a rice worm. In an environment like the Five Rings cultivators, the competition would definitely be more intense than in his world or Chowang realm. It wasn't a matter of whether you could slack off or not. But if you slacked off, you would be crushed. He had to hurry up and work hard. He couldn't just go to the Five Rings cultivators and let them bully him, right? He refocused his attention on the stars outside the porthole. The spiritual vigor in the raft was denser than in Chowang realm's flying ship, but Lu Xiaoyi knew very well that in the future, wherever he stayed, there would be no lack of spiritual vigor. How could a high-level cultivation planet lack the purest spiritual vigor? What he really lacked in the future was the opportunity to return to the void of the universe. Before he reached the Yuanying realm, he wouldn't have such a good opportunity to train his soul and spirit. Therefore, anyone with half a brain would know what to train now. Chapter 172. He continued to train his mind and worked even harder than before. This was because a rice worm had no confidence in the future and had a sense of urgency to survive. The strength of his mind power allowed him to obtain practical benefits. Otherwise, Chao Wendao's shocking technique wouldn't have been able to affect him. Battles were filled with all kinds of coincidences and luck, but to survive, the only thing he could rely on was his own solid ability. A month later, most of the other Foundation establishment cultivators who were focused on their cultivation didn't notice, but Lu Xiaoyi, who had been staring at the starry sky and training his mind power, clearly saw all the changes. The floating raft seemed to have passed through a mirror at a specific location. Ripples appeared in the surrounding space, as if time and space had become unreal. He couldn't describe all of these changes clearly, but he could vaguely feel them. After all, these profound changes in the Tao realm were still too profound for a small Foundation establishment like him to comprehend. Following that, the floating raft seemed to have entered another world, another starry sky. Lu Xiaoyi could clearly feel that the stars here were completely different from before, and had become much thinner. However, this was only the surface. Different star zones would always have different starry skies around them. Some star zones would be brighter, while others would be dimmer. If no one reminded them, all of this would be no different in the eyes of a Foundation establishment cultivator. But Lu Xiaoyi knew that there was a fundamental difference. This was because the method he used to train his spiritual power was to strengthen his spiritual power by visualizing the different impacts produced by different stars. In this starry sky, the spiritual impact he received after visualizing it for the first time was completely different from the thousands of times he had visualized it in the past few years. It was hard to tell the difference, but the feeling was extremely comfortable. Not only was the increase in his mind power greater than before, it also had the effect of nourishing his sea of consciousness, causing the hidden damage caused by the barbaric increase in his mind power to be repaired. This was something he couldn't understand, and he couldn't ask, and there was no one he could ask. He discovered that although he was a small Foundation establishment cultivator, he had many secrets. His identity as a transmigrator, the presence of the Shard of Fate, the strange training of his mind power. What did this mean? A mutated rice worm? Of course, he didn't know that this was the antimatter space that was opposite to the positive space. It had completely different heavenly laws. To him, being able to bathe in two different worlds played a decisive role in strengthening his spiritual development. This was an opportunity that other cultivators simply could not encounter. For most cultivators, they would not be able to come to the antimaterial space unless they were at least yuanying. And after yuanying, they would not be able to cultivate their own spirit. It was far from being reborn like when they were young, and there was a qualitative change. Similarly, no small Foundation establishment cultivator would have such an opportunity, even if their masters had brought them across the main and negative realms when they were Foundation establishment. This was because they did not have the special ability to train their mind like Lu Xiaoyi. Just like the Foundation establishment cultivators on this floating raft, they did not know and they could not train their minds. Therefore, they could only desperately absorb the spiritual vigor. How could the spiritual vigor in the floating raft be as pure as the spiritual vigor of the future 5 rings? Conforming to the Great Tao? But this was the method that they did not want to waste time on. Being trapped in all aspects, a rice worm had already pulled away from his own level in a certain decisive direction, and this distance would only grow larger in the future. He did not try to understand which sect he was about to join. Was there a need? Could it be transferred according to his will? Were there wolves that did not eat sheep that could survive in the 5 rings? Other than training his ability to become stronger, he had no other choice. Life seemed to be getting further and further away from him. The Foundation establishment cultivators were already used to life on the floating raft. Previously, they were on the flying boat. Now, they were on the floating raft. Most of their companions were probably starting a new life in the Chaoguang realm, right? A higher level of cultivation and a more progressive spirit meant that they would have a broader future in cultivation. It also meant that this path would be more difficult. Falling behind was not just a sad withdrawal, but a loss of life. No one would visit them, even if they were from the same sect as them for a long time in the future. They had to improve themselves as quickly as possible in order to adapt to an unfamiliar environment. On this point, everyone had a clear understanding. Being able to reach Foundation establishment in a low-level cultivation world in itself meant that they were not ordinary, but their advantages would disappear in the new environment. For Foundation establishment cultivators, being outstanding in the Chi Eater stage did not guarantee that they would be equally outstanding in the Foundation establishment stage. The journey continued in silence, bringing with it uncertainty, apprehension, and uneasiness about the future. But the journey eventually came to an end. After a year and a half, they felt the floating raft tremble and the scene of space shattering appeared again. The floating raft rushed out and returned to the original normal starry sky. Even if the other Foundation establishment cultivators felt something, they were completely clueless about the situation. Lu Xiaoyi knew a bit more than them. Although he still did not know the details, He knew the consequences of this tremor. They had returned to the normal world. It should be some kind of spatial transition technique, right? That was Lu Xiaoyi's guess. The space they appeared in was completely different from all the previous space. After flying for more than 10 days, all the Foundation establishment cultivators could feel it. It was not the number of stars, nor was it the change in brightness, but a kind of vitality. To put it nicely, it was very lively. To put it bluntly, battles were everywhere. At first, it was an occasional one-on-one battle, but then it became more frequent. There were one-on-one battles, group fights, bombardments, and chases. This was not a simulation, but a real life and death battle. Because they saw with their own eyes a powerful cultivator turn into ashes in the violent explosion of a spell, and then a strong black hole appeared. At first, they thought that this might be the revenge of a certain force in a certain world, but later, as the battles became more frequent, they finally understood. How is this an invasion of foreign enemies? It was simply these bandits fighting among themselves. Moreover, it looked very normal for them. It was completely the scene of a big bandit den. All the Foundation establishment cultivators could not help but wail in their hearts. They fought like this even in the universe, completely ignoring the fact that Yuanying was a precious fighting force. One could imagine, if they went to the world, how frequent would the battles be among the middle and low-level cultivators? It probably didn't matter if a Foundation establishment cultivator died, like an ant dying, right? It was only at this time that some people began to miss the good things of the Chawang realm. They missed the peaceful days of cultivating for the sake of cultivating. In theory, it was like a real cultivator. Unfortunately, they could no longer go back. Chapter 173. Lu Xiaoyi was disdainful of these people's reactions. They deserved it. Did they really think that the title of Universe Robber was for nothing? There were wrong names, but there were no wrong nicknames. He had long expected such a situation, which was why he had tried his best to avoid getting involved in this mess. Unfortunately, the heavens did not comply with his wishes. He had managed to avoid it, but he had accidentally killed someone and was now being used as a scapegoat. The affairs of the world were hard to predict, and one had no choice. Humans were like duckweed, drifting with the waves. Without reaching a certain level, how could one completely control their own fate? F***CK. Could it be that there were also people in the fifth ring who had obtained the Shard of Destiny? How worrisome. What headache. In less than a month, the true appearance of an incomparably huge star field could be seen from the porthole. From the beginning, it was only a bright spot, but as they got closer, it became clearer and clearer. Foundation establishment cultivators had only seen a few star fields from the perspective of the universe. For those who came from the lower 3-star fields, they had only seen the lower 3-star fields, the lower 4-star fields, and a mortal star that the ship had landed on. But compared to the star that appeared in front of them now, it was like a firefly competing with the sun and moon. It was completely incomparable. Even if they did not know the exact strength of a fifth ring cultivator, just by looking at the size of the star field, they could understand that the so-called resistance of the Chawang world was just a show of strength. Resistance my ass. Might as well just surrender. Putting on an act. No wonder they directly bowed their heads when they saw the fifth ring's floating raft. The closer they got to the fifth ring, the denser the number of cultivators became. There were constantly floating rafts returning from the outside, and there were also floating rafts rushing out of the atmosphere. It was like a flourishing port, receiving and receiving pirate ships from the north and south. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. It was easy to enter this den of thieves, but difficult to leave. Hopefully, the sect he was from wasn't too keen on war. There should at least be people in charge of logistics, right? The floating raft plunged into the magnificent star field, and no one seemed to ask about its origin or who it was carrying. It continued to descend. When it passed by a certain mountain range, the supreme Taoist Keda laughed heartily and rolled up his sleeves, wrapping the 10 cultivators in it and descending towards the mountain range. Afterwards, The floating raft swept across the 5 rings of the continent. When they passed by the mountain gates of the sects, there were Taoists carrying them down. Lu Xiaoyi and the others were the 5th group. When they passed by a towering, snowy mountain range, senior martial brother Chung waved his sleeve and swept the 10 people together. They then landed on the snowy mountain peak. Compared to the orthodox Taoist sects heaven and earth in the sleeve, senior martial brother Cheng's skill in this aspect was clearly lacking. When Kada swept up the others, the 10 people in the group of magic power were able to maintain a distance from each other in an orderly manner. However, when senior martial brother Chung swept up the others, he appeared to be confident and at ease, but the group of magic power was truly a mess. The Foundation establishment cultivators were all upside down, bumping into each other in the group of magic power. Lu Xiaoyi was dizzy from the spinning and wanted to find support. He reached out and grabbed something soft and round. He wasn't a virgin, so of course he knew what he had grabbed. He apologized profusely and let go. It was clear that the careless Taoist Chung didn't care whether they were comfortable or not. He brought them here, reported to them, and performed their duties. That was the end of the mission. The rest of the matters were naturally taken care of by the appropriate people, including the arrangements for these minor Foundation establishment cultivators. Although they were called minor Foundation establishment cultivators, that was only relative to their realm. In fact, they were all adults, so their personal lives weren't a problem. They only needed to determine the most important things for cultivators, such as the direction of their orthodoxy, cultivation techniques, benefits, and so on. The 10 Foundation establishment cultivators stood dizzily in front of an unfamiliar palace. Lu Xiaoyi was the first to regain his senses. That fellow had swept them down from a height of 10,000 feet, but he didn't care about their possible reactions. He just patted his butt and left. Lu Xiaoyi secretly looked around and swept his gaze across the faces of the 4 cultivators. Fortunately, the situation in the air was rather chaotic, so no one could determine who had stretched out their perverted hands. Of course, he wouldn't take the initiative to admit it. For such matters, it was best for everyone to feign ignorance. It would be even more awkward if he admitted it. Why bother? Besides, didn't he just grab a handful? It wasn't like he lost a piece of flesh. The spiritual vigor of heaven and earth was so abundant that it was terrifying. He didn't know if it was because this was the mountain gate of a sect that it was so dense, or if it was like this in the entire 5th ring domain. Just by standing here, he could feel that there was endless spiritual vigor trying to drill into his body, compared to when he activated the spirit gathering formation in the 3 lower realms. It was countless times stronger, as if it was real. Looking ahead, the palace was very luxurious. It had flying eaves and beast ridges, and its design was simple and unadorned. Just by standing in front of it, one could feel the vicissitudes of history. There were often cultivators going in and out of the gate, flying here and there. None of them were using magic tools. They only had one form in the air, flying swords. Lu Xiaoyi sighed again. Somehow, he still ended up in an illegal cultivation sect. Looking at this style, this was undoubtedly a swordsman's sect. A bunch of poor people who couldn't even afford magic tools. Couldn't they use other flying magic tools other than flying swords? In his heart, a cultivator's magic tool should be the kind that was stable and could be used to hold gums, banquets, and wine while flying. It would be best if there were a few female attendants fanning and holding umbrellas behind it. This kind of orthodoxy was not to his liking, although he knew that he was very sharp in close combat. That was for survival. There was no way he could practice spells. It wasn't because he liked swords. He was dizzy at the sight of blood. In terms of actual combat effects, it was also not suitable for this orthodoxy. Once a fight broke out, the world would be filled with blood and flesh. Wouldn't he be dizzy and turn into a fool? By the time he understood, he would have been cut down. However, he was not in a hurry. According to his understanding of the big sect from the books, there were very few sects that had only one orthodoxy. 100 flowers blossomed and 100 schools of thought contended. This was the right way for a sect to develop. In the cultivation world, there were also periods of time. One period of time, one period of time, another period of time. Only when there were enough branches in a sect could it always keep up with the pace of development in history. He understood all these principles. Therefore, even a swordsman sect like this would also have branches of magic, right? It was just that it was not the mainstream now, so it hid and cannot be seen. Lu Xiaoyi comforted himself. A Taoist child walked out. He was still a chi eater, but his bearing was above the restless foundation establishment cultivators. However, he also knew that although these people came from the outside world, although their knowledge was shallow, although their words were laughable, their realm was still their realm. He could only and must treat these people as his martial uncles. Guests from afar, please wait at the Ascension Hall on Chinchou Peak. The hall masters will make arrangements for you to enter the sect. The Ascension Hall was the palace in front of him. As for its position in this sect, not everyone knew. Lu Xiaoyi suddenly thought of a problem. It seemed that he still did not know the name of this sect. It was not that Taoist Cheng was not thorough in his work. In fact, he had also roughly introduced the sect to these foundation establishment cultivators on that mortal planet. However, at that time, Lu Xiaoyi was not around. He was waiting behind the slope to slaughter people. Then, he was directly brought onto the floating raft. There was no interaction on the way, until now. Because he was resistant to the 5 rings, he was too lazy to ask. Therefore, he walked into the sect's main hall and still did not know anything. Chapter 174. A group of 10 people filed in. The first 9 were cautious, afraid that their rash behavior would leave a bad impression in front of the master. Only Lu Xiaoyi, who was the last, looked around from time to time. Although he had not known them for long, he still had his own understanding of the cultivators in the Pirate Star area. Not to mention other things, just from the way the cultivators acted, he could see a certain unruliness. From the selection process of the cultivators in the Mortal Star, he could vaguely guess that these people were probably the kind of people who did not care about trifles. They were not old-fashioned cultivation fools, so there was no need to be so cautious. In fact, everyone understood this principle, but the others wanted to stay here and had expectations, so they could not let go. Lu Xiaoyi was different. He had no expectations, so he could not wait to be kicked out of the reformist sect. So he did not care. Cultivation was easy. Lifespan, 100 or 200 more years would be enough. Combat power, as long as he could protect himself. As for becoming a deity, a Buddha, a monarch, or a saint, that was a 1 in a million possibility. Why should he force himself to pursue it? He had his own attitude toward cultivation. He did not know where this attitude came from. Was it his personality from his previous life? Or was it a philosophy formed by wandering in the universe for countless years? Or was it Lu Xiaoyi's attitude of standing aloof from worldly affairs? In any case, he felt that everything depended on the cost-effectiveness ratio. He was willing to pay a certain price and receive a certain return, so he did not hesitate to choose cultivation. But if he worked hard like a dog in cultivation just to increase his lifespan by a few hundred years, he felt that it was not suitable. He wanted to be more relaxed, like the cultivators of the morning light, so he did not think much of coming to this place. He could completely foresee that in the daily life of this sect, there would be no romance, no music, chess, calligraphy, painting, leisure, and lying drunk in the grass pavilion. There would only be fighting, strength, life, and death. There would be no end to the future. Could you pursue it all? Even if you lived for 10,000 years, you would be tired for 10,000 years. What was the point? The roof of the Ascension Hall was very high, far higher than normal. This might also be the architectural style of the 5th ring. Lu Xiaoyi could not help but think that a high roof might be advantageous for fighting, right? After all, the people here were very violent. In the middle of the hall, there were 2 Taoists sitting cross-legged. They were both solemn and imposing Taoists. In Lu Xiaoyi's memories of his previous life, whenever 2 people appeared, one would be tall and one short, one fat and one skinny, one black and one white. They were all ordinary cultivators. The only difference was that the person in the main seat had nothing on him. He was dressed in a Taoist robe. The person in the secondary seat carried a sword case on his back. They were all flipping through the jade slips in their hands. Seeing everyone enter, the Taoist priest bowed and waved his hand. No need to be so courteous. In my sect, we don't care about these empty formalities. He stood up and swept his gaze over the crowd. Everyone's appearance and behavior basically matched the jade slip in his hand. Martial Uncle Chung wasn't a rash person. He had a general description of the foundation building cultivators' personalities and habits. It was just that he had been secretly observing them for over a year, so the little foundation building cultivators didn't know about it. The fifth ring is a moving realm. It's different from ordinary realms. There are many people in the universe. I think the notoriety of the fifth ring has long spread. Whether it's right or wrong, whether it's innocent or innocent, I won't say much. Whether it's true or false, time will pass, and you'll naturally know. It's useless for me to say that it's good. If you're still not satisfied after staying here for a while, you can leave. I'll say something arrogant, but there are many people who want to enter the snowy dome. We don't lack low-level cultivators. His words were half true and half false. In the fifth ring, the snowy dome was one of the few major forces that countless loose cultivators yearned for. Only the supreme and three pure ones could barely be compared to it. Therefore, they really didn't lack low-level foundation building cultivators. However, they still diligently plunder foundation building cultivators for tens of thousands of years. Just like the supreme and three pure ones, there was a deeper reason for this. It was said that mixed friendships were beautiful. This wasn't just a joke. In the cultivation world, the so-called mixed friendships were made up of cultivators from different realms. What they saw was their different thinking, different roots, and different luck. Only starting from one's own realm wouldn't last long. There had to be new blood and cultivators from other realms. This was also the experience of the fifth ring's cultivation world. Every dog has its day. Whose house would it be in for the next 1,000 years? No one knew. What the fifth ring did was to gather cultivators from other realms and complete the integration of the realms at the grassroots level. This was very important. In fact, based on the fifth ring's cultivation pattern in the past few thousand years, up to 30% of the high-level cultivators had been abducted when they were still young. This was already a very high proportion. For the fifth ring, there were three important sources of talent. 40% of the fifth ring's cultivators were from the mainland, 30% were from plundering, and the remaining 30% came from Zhuozhou. This kind of slightly complicated source of talent created the fifth ring's abundance of talents, forever thriving. Moreover, there was no need to worry about the loyalty of these abducted cultivators. On the contrary, when they grew up, they would be the most staunch supporters of the fifth ring. For example, Jean Dan, who is speaking now, was actually recruited from some unknown corner 300 years ago. Because it was purely by chance, it was even more impossible for them to be spies from some enemy sections. From this point, they were far purer than the loose cultivators of the fifth ring. I am Gu He, the Ascension Hall Master. This is Gu Gang, the Ascension Hall's Vice Hall Master. If everything goes smoothly, from today onwards, you should call us martial uncles. Come, everyone, introduce yourselves. After today, you will be fellow brothers and sisters. You should get to know each other and help each other in cultivation and battle in the future, improving each other. The foundation-building cultivators signed up one by one. Ling Ruofeng, Xiao Beinan, Zhang Qianjun, Sima Wan, Mu Jianshun. Listen, these names, one after another, high-end and grand. Who gave him these names? Look at how responsible he was as a father. And there was also Chao Wendao. This name was a little bad, but in the end, he died. Next were the self-introductions of the four Kuan cultivators. Qi Nerong, Mu Kailing, Tang Xiaoluo, Gong Xiaoda, Lu Xiaoyi. Everyone felt that a strange thing had sneaked in. Lu Xiaoyi felt very embarrassed. He was just instinctively resisting. Since everyone was rushing to register, he would be the last. However, he didn't expect that the last two Kuan cultivators' names would be. His life was not smooth sailing. It seemed that the direction of his life in recent years was always at odds with him. The Foundation establishment cultivators held back their laughter, but the two future martial uncles, Gu He and Gu Gang, didn't laugh. With their strength, such a small episode wouldn't be able to move them. Are there any other questions? If not, the next step is to prepare for the official entry process. It might be a little complicated, but it's for your own good. Just treat it as a formality. Chapter 175. Everyone shook their heads. They were very clear that Taoist Gu He's words were light as a feather, but there was no room for doubt in his words. Pulling them here from a distance of 200 years, they couldn't have any other thoughts. Struggling was useless. Most importantly, there was no need to struggle. Among them, not everyone yearned for flying swords. After all, Taoist spells were the mainstream in the cultivation world of the universe. Many of them wanted to become Dharma cultivators, but the Taoist was so selective that they had no choice but to listen to his arrangements. But there was one person who still wanted to make a final effort. Lu Xiaoyi felt that even if he acted a little heretical, these two exalted masters couldn't really do anything to him. They couldn't kill him on the spot. There was no need to, and it wasn't worth being angry with. What if they really gave him his freedom in order to show the grace of a large sect? Or banished him, or sent him to an idle job that didn't require competition? These were all in line with his wishes. This place was so full of spiritual vigor. Just taking a breath was intoxicating. He didn't even need to find a special place. Just this kind of overall environment was enough for him to cultivate leisurely, right? Even if it was to guard a warehouse, watch a gate, raise a pet, etc., it was all fine. So he raised his hand. "Exalted Master, I have a question. I don't know if it's appropriate to ask." Gui said amiably, "Ask. In our domed snow peak, low-level cultivators have the right to ask any elder at any time and any place. It's up to them whether they answer or not. But this kind of behavior is not guilty and won't be punished." Lu Xiaoyi was a little embarrassed. "Exalted Master, what's the name of your sect?" "I don't even know." Gu He and Gu Gang were very surprised. Of course, they knew that this little foundation establishment wasn't lying, but Gu He didn't understand. "Didn't Martial Uncle Cheng mention it to you?" "Oh, it's that senior who brought you here from so far away." Lu Xiaoyi was very helpless. "He did, but when I told them, I hadn't joined yet. After I joined, I directly got on the floating raft and didn't have the chance to listen to their teachings. This disciple is only here to fill in the gaps." Lu Xiaoyi's words had a purpose. He wanted to make it clear that he was just a reserve, someone who had been randomly picked by Senior Cheng. He was a substandard product who had not volunteered to be part of the team. Only by letting the two masters understand this point would they be able to look down on him, not put him in their eyes, and finally let him go. Gu He and AI shook their heads. In the Ice Dome Peak, there's no substitute. There's no substitute. We don't think that anyone is inferior. In front of the great Tao, everyone is equal. As you said, there are many inferior goods who ultimately stand at the highest position. Since you don't know the name of the sect, then I will tell you today. Listen well and remember this name forever. In the future, you will be its pride, and it will be your glory. We are swordsmen, the one and only swordsman, the unyielding swordsman, the swordsman that struck fear in people's hearts. In the history of cultivation in the entire universe, we may not be the strongest, but we're the only ones that have never been conquered by anyone. Remember its name. It was forged with the blood of countless swordsmen seniors. It is sacred and inviolable. Xinyuan Sword Sect is our name. Gu He's words were very passionate, making the other Foundation establishment cultivators' blood boil. However, the little Foundation establishment cultivator on the other side clearly did not agree. Who doesn't know how to brag? If you guys are so awesome, why don't you take over the heavenly court and become emperors? But Master, I actually want to be a Dharma cultivator. I don't really want to leave your, Xinyuan Sword Sect, right? This disciple thinks that since Xinyuan is so big, there must be other sects, right? There are also Dharma cultivators, right? This disciple will just take care of the logistics for you. This disciple is scared of blood and can't fight. This disciple will embarrass Xinyuan. The surrounding foundation establishment cultivators' hearts sank. They knew that things were not good. This Lu Xiaoyi did not know what was good for him. They were afraid that he would lose his life on the spot. He even said that he was scared of blood. Was he lying to a child? Apart from making people feel disgusted, who would actually believe such a lie? However, the two swordsmen Jin Dan did not get angry. Gui continued to speak softly. No, our Xianyuan has only one profession, one orthodoxy, one direction, one voice. No matter who it is in the sect, even if it's a toilet cleaner, he has to learn the sword. There are no exceptions. Gu Gang also advised from the side. If you don't try, how will you know that you are not suitable? I promise you that I will stay in the dome for 10 years. If you still think that you are not suitable to be a swordsman, then come find me. Another Taoist carrying a sword case walked into the hall. Gui pointed at him. You guys go with your senior Gu Bei. There are still some procedures to go through before entering the sect. The group immediately left the hall, including the somewhat unwilling Lu Xiaoyi. However, he knew that today's probing would end here. He could not go overboard. Propriety was a good thing, and not everyone had it. If he continued to pester them, his little life would be in danger. In the Ascension Hall, Gu He and Gu Gang looked at the jade slip in their hands. On it was written Martial Uncle's evaluation of becoming a Taoist. Ling Ruofeng, pig nose with onions. Xiao Bainan, lacking something. Gong Xiaodai, heart of a snake. Lu Xiaoyi, sinister and vicious. Innate sword seed. The two looked at each other and smiled bitterly. Normally, they would have kicked this thing out of the dome long ago. However, Martial Uncle's meaning was very clear. They also wanted to see if this was an innate sword seed, or a lowly one. Senior Gu Bei was also a foundation establishment cultivator. His seniority was very high, and he was from the same generation as the two Ascension Hall masters. However, Gu He and Gu Gang belonged to the successful group, while Gu Bei belonged to the group that failed. Of course, the failed group was the mainstream. They were scattered all over the dome's snow mountain to help with the sect's miscellaneous matters, or were sent to the vast territories controlled by Xianyuan. He was joking and ridiculing in his heart, but Senior Gu Bei was very responsible. This was very normal. Those who were not responsible would not have been sent to work in the dome. They would have been sent to somewhere far away. How could they have the safety and benefits here? There are 3 things. They are what you must do before joining the sect. First, you need to pass the testimony test. The purpose of the testimony test is to eliminate those who try to sneak into Xianyuan for some reason. The 5 rings sect attracts wind. Not only inside, but also outside, there are countless hostile people who want to sneak in. The lighter ones are spying on information. The heavier ones are looking for opportunities to sabotage. The 10 or so sects with the strongest strength in the 5-ring sect are the top targets. Our Xianyuan is the most important. A foundation establishment cultivator asked, Senior brother, is it something like the Tao-seeking mirror? Senior Gu Bei shook his head after hearing him explain the Tao-seeking mirror's function. Our 5-ring sect is a brilliant upper realm, but we won't pry into other people's privacy. The testimony test started tens of thousands of years ago, when Xianyuan was established. Because the environment was complicated at that time, internal strife and mutual infiltration were the main reasons. Thus, we had no choice but to carefully investigate the past of those who entered the sect to eliminate spies. But times have changed. Now, the main enemies of the 5-ring sect are no longer within the realm, but outside. From the perspective of development, some rules have been changed accordingly. For example, the testimony test. In the past, we searched the memories of those who entered the sect, but we don't do that anymore. Every cultivator, regardless of their realm, has the right to keep secrets. In order to respect the individual, our Xianyuan does not test the past, only the future. What you need to do is to prove your loyalty. This test will end when you have Yuanying. When you have Yuanying, the restrictions will be removed, and you'll be free. Thus, you don't have to worry about the sect threatening you. To be honest, with your current foundation establishment strength, you don't deserve it. Chapter 176. He spoke in a lofty manner, emphasizing the importance of respecting the cultivator's privacy. However, this was a change that he had no choice but to make. Of course, the sect would want to know the past of the cultivator. From this, they would uncover some clues that would be detrimental to the sect. However, the Five-Ring sect was an extremely aggressive union. Other than Xin Yuan, the other powerful Taoist sects, such as the Supreme Sect, the Three Pure Ones, the Qimendunjia sect, the 10,000 Views sect, and the Temple of Divine Revelation, all considered themselves to be orthodox Taoists. They were good at refining their hearts and were not afraid of others sneaking in. Thus, they were open to outsiders. In other words, these orthodox Taoists didn't ask about your past. They only asked for your future. This forced Xin Yuan to make a change. Otherwise, when other people were open to accepting disciples, Xin Yuan would dig up the ugly story of someone who peed on the bed when they were young. Even if the swordsman's fighting strength was strong, it was still unacceptable to the unruly people of the Five-Ring sect. If they couldn't accept a foundation establishment disciple, how could they rely on their own cultivation? Thus, Xin Yuan was forced to learn from the other Taoist sections. They didn't look for the past, only the future. Simply put, you had to make a hard oath. You had to treat Xin Yuan as you should, and if you violated it, you had to do so, and so. This hard oath would stop until you reached Yuanying. This was because when a cultivator reached the Yuanying stage, they could no longer make an oath. Their mental state was also extremely repulsed by such an oath. Thus, no one could control a Yuanying Huiyang through a mere oath. Everyone expressed their understanding. This was too normal. Which sect didn't do this? As long as they didn't have a heart, these things wouldn't affect them at all. There was only one person who wasn't easy to deal with. Senior Brother Gu Bei. Apart from breaking the oath after reaching the nascent soul realm, what other methods are there? This question was very excessive. Senior Brother Gu Bei looked at Lu Xiaoyi, who was standing at the end and smiling like a little white flower. A surge of anger welled up in his heart, but he didn't show it. Why do you ask? Is there a reason? The little white flower looked at him innocently. Senior Brother, it's like this. Disciple actually had no choice but to enter Xin Yuan. Unlike them, I was forced to do something beyond my ability. Disciple has also mentioned to Guru Gu He and Guru Gu Gang that Disciple's favorite is Disciple's magic. I'm not trying to betray Xin Yuan. I'm just thinking that maybe I'll have a chance to achieve something in the future. Only then did Senior Brother Gu Bei calm down a little. He was a fifth-ring cultivator and had been born and raised here. What he couldn't stand the most was that his disciples weren't loyal enough to Xin Yuan. However, this kind of choice between sword and spell wasn't rare, nor was it too much. Among the Xin Yuan disciples, those who came from Zhuozhou and those who joined from the fifth ring did not have such a problem. Their goals were clear and their thoughts were firm. Only those disciples who came back from the outside world would have such thoughts from time to time. He still needed to be trained. When you leave the Xin Yuan sword sect, the oath is naturally invalid, but you have to think carefully about how you're going to leave. Senior Brother Gu Bei ignored this person who had been poisoned by the thoughts of a Dharma cultivator and continued his explanation. The first step is to prove one's heart, and the second step is to clarify history. You must understand the achievements of our Xin Yuan sect, the wars, the people, the way of thinking, and the bottom line. If you don't understand, Lu Xiaoyi's eyes shone with a strange light. What'll happen? Gu Bei glared at him. Then continue, until you completely understand. Lu Xiaoyi, right? Cultivators from the outside world like you can choose your own path. But before that, you have to understand the price we paid to bring you from a place 200 years away to the fifth ring. I won't lie to you, but a trip like this in the universe costs at least tens of thousands of supreme-grade spirit stones. If you can afford it, you could go down the mountain and find a better job. If you can't take it out, then don't talk nonsense over there. This sentence was very straightforward, completely shattering Lu Xiaoyi's thoughts and revealing the nature of the Fifth Ring's bandits. When gentle advice didn't work, it was even more intimidating to speak bluntly. He finally understood Xuanyuan's bottom line after all his probing. Once you enter the bandits' lair, don't think about leaving in one piece. Using his theory, if you can't struggle, then think about how to enjoy it. Gu Bei was very satisfied with his incisive attitude when he saw this little foundation establishment cultivator with her. Finally, pay your respects to the sacred relics. Those who have made great contributions to the development of Xianyuan and played a decisive role in the development of Xianyuan need to be worshipped one by one. I know that you may not be fully convinced now, but as time passes and your strength and cultivation becomes stronger and stronger, don't forget to pay your respects to them one by one. If fate allows you to meet one day, you can also become immortal figures like them. With a wave of his hand, a flying ship that was several meters long appeared in front of everyone. Compared to the floating raft they had sat on before, this one was much more simple and crude. That was because that one was used to travel through the universe, but this one was used in the atmosphere. Why did they know? Because it was open. Cheongding's snow mountain covered an enormous area, so they needed a means of transportation. Otherwise, with the strength of these foundation establishment cultivators, they wouldn't be able to complete the initiation ceremony in a month. The 10 people boarded the boat, and Gu Bei controlled it to fly forward at a low altitude. They couldn't figure out the direction because it was too big and there were many palaces everywhere. How could they know what they were doing? There were always passing swordsman soldiers passing by the boat and greeting Gu Bei. It was normal for newcomers to enter here, so it wasn't strange. A moment later, the flying boat arrived at a mountain peak. Among all the peaks in the Cheongding Snow Mountain, this was the largest and most dangerous one. The flying boat landed on the mountainside, and Gu Bei's voice rang out. This is Wenguang Peak. It's also the core of Xuanyuan's 13 peaks. All sort decrees come from here. The Primal Chaos Thunder Palace is the main palace that manages all cultivators. Of course, this includes cultivators below the upper level of Yuanying. However, we're not going this place, but the flying boat landed in front of a building that couldn't be called a palace, but a single-story building piled up with huge stones. It wasn't tall, but it was thick and heavy. There were 3 large words written on the door: Sword Soul Hall. There was no one at the door, but there weren't any people coming and going around the buildings on the other peaks. It was quiet and solemn. Before they even got close, they could already feel an awe-inspiring pressure. Gu Bei clasped his hands respectfully at the door. Gu Bei of the Ascension Hall, sending the newcomers here to prove their hearts and leave their souls. The door slid open silently, and a voice rang out. Wait in the side hall. The 10 of them were led to a side hall. Everyone vaguely knew what was going to happen next. This was the legendary soul leaving guide. In their original cultivation world, the sects didn't have this kind of ability, but that didn't mean they hadn't heard of it. It was said that if one left their soul here, regardless of whether they were alive or dead, far or near, the sects would know immediately. It was hard to say whether it was good or bad, gain or loss. On the contrary, Lu Xiaoyi didn't care. Since he'd decided to enjoy it, there was no need to talk so much nonsense. They'd already been brought here. What do you think about my yearning for freedom? I'm not willing to casually leave behind my roots. Is that okay? Chapter 177. A cultivator walked out of the hall, but he was a Jindan sword cultivator. He didn't report his name either. This kind of shady business where newcomers establish their souls would be done dozens of times a year. So how could he recognize so many people? It was better not to report, and everyone would have peace. He went straight to the point. If you want to enter my Xianyuan gate, you have to leave your soul as a token of proof. From now on, the sect will be your concern, and you will also be the sect's concern. Leaving your soul must be voluntary and cannot be forced. I will ask you one more question. Are all of you willing to do this? The 10 people nodded in agreement, and Lu Xiaoyi's voice was the loudest among them. This caused everyone to raise their eyebrows. This fence-sitter was really quick to fall. Before, he was still unwilling, but now he was like a dog. They did not know Lu Xiaoyi's temper. Since they could not avoid being rice worms here, of course they had to be more comfortable. If they wanted to be more comfortable, they had to be more obedient. This logic was not difficult to understand. Jindan continued, the Tao of Soul has a great influence on cultivators. But to you, The advantages far outweigh the disadvantages. Once you go out, the sect will be able to detect it immediately and react accordingly. After yuaniing, your soul will return to your body. The so-called soul lamp here is nothing more than a display of your condition and will no longer affect you. Therefore, soul lamps and heart vows will stop at yuaniing. Today, I am telling you all this to let you know that the sect has no intention of using soul lamps to control anyone. This is an ironclad rule. Even the sect master has no right to ask the soul hall to interfere with the sect's disciples. You can rest assured. After saying this, he did not bother to look at everyone's reaction. He rushed to the side and bowed, shouting, "Sincerity, determination, and ambition. These are the foundations of us swordsmen. I have the 3 lives lamp technique, which can leave a soul and guide a true spirit. Who will go first?" Everyone stepped forward one after another. The so-called 3 lives lamp method was to take a strand of one's soul, a strand of spiritual power, and a drop of blood essence. It was a very complicated method, and some special materials were used to make the lamps on the spot. How could they understand these things? They could only see the lamps in Jin Dan's hands. From then on, they were Xianyuan people, and there was no way to change that. The entry process of Xianyuan was much simpler than it had been in the past. In the past, it was difficult to enter the sect, but now it was easy to enter. This was an irreversible trend. There was no unchanging method. Ideals could be persisted, but some external factors could not be ignored. The recruitment of talents in the 5th ring domain was too cruel. They were all top forces with outstanding means. There were hundreds of large and small sects, and any one of them was a powerful existence in other domains. Such a competitive environment forced the Xianyuan Sword School to repeatedly lower the examination conditions for their disciples. First pull them into the sect, then slowly examine them. This was the overall strategy of all sects for their new disciples. This was also the reason why this group of foundation establishment cultivators who came from afar had their soul lamps lit. From an overall point of view, they were precious, but from an individual point of view, they were insignificant. This was their situation. Their value was only in the eyes of the forces. If they rewarded you with a cultivation meal, you had to accept it. If you didn't accept it, you wouldn't make a difference. It was very realistic. Lu Xiaoyi was also made into a soul lamp. It went smoothly, but Jin Dan, who intercepted it, was a little surprised. This little foundation establishment cultivator's spiritual power was much stronger than the others. Everyone had their secrets. He had seen many cultivators with talent, but how many could truly reach the top? After leaving the Sword Spear Hall, each person was given a jade slip of Xuanyuan's history. They were not ordinary mortals, so they did not need to go back and study it for many days. With a cultivator's brain power, it would only take them a quarter of an hour to finish reading this kind of history that was not a cultivation technique. After reading Xuanyuan's history, everyone thought that they would enter the next section, but Senior Brother Gu Bei was not at ease. Perhaps he thought that a certain person might not be willing to read it seriously. So he looked at Lu Xiaoyi. "I need a spot check." "Lu Xiaoyi, it's you. Ask, where's the ancestral land of Xianyuan Sword School?" Lu Xiaoyi sighed. It was really difficult to be a rice worm. It seemed that this unlucky senior brother had his eyes on him. Zhuozhou, Qingkong, Northern Domain, Mount. What year was the expedition to Celestial Wolf? Who led the troops? How many people were sent? How long did it take? It was 19,000 years ago. The ancestors of the 3 Qin dynasties led the troops. A total of 45 great cultivators were sent, including 11 true sovereigns and 34 yuaniing. After 120 years, they defeated Celestial Wolf, occupied the Sparrow Nest, and obtained the 5th ring. To be honest, Lu Xiaoyi did not pay too much attention. But even if he did not pay too much attention with his memory, it was not a problem to remember the general idea. Thus, he answered without hesitation and was immensely proud of himself. Who was the 4th ancestor? What achievements did he have? What mount did he ride? Lu Xiaoyi opened his mouth and said, "The 4th ancestor, Hung Zhou, who created the E-Sword School, rode a white crane? A black horse? a white elephant, or a black donkey? He really did not remember this, and he had no idea what a great cultivator's mount was. Gubei sneered, wrong. Since the day we swordsmen established our sect, not a single great cultivator had a mount, because as long as we have a sword, we can give up everything else. Let me ask you, why are the mounts you made up either white or black? Why can't you have mounts of other colors? Lu Xiaoyi frowned. Since he played chess, it could only be black and white. What other colors could there be? Senior brother Gubei shouted, half-hearted and half-hearted. Your punishment is to look at the history again. Later, I will examine you in detail. This was revenge. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. He had not even become a rice worm when he entered the sect, but he had already become a bad example. Actually, based on his words and actions, he should have been punished when he entered the hall, but the two hall masters let him go out of respect for martial Uncle Chung. However, senior brother Gubei did not know about that, so he taught him a small lesson, letting this little ant know how high the sky was and how deep the earth was. This time, he looked through the history seriously, spending a full 15 minutes. He decided to be more serious in this place and could not be like before. He could see that these swordsmen looked heroic, but they were all narrow-minded and mischievous. Senior brother Gubei looked at this little foundation establishment expectantly, but he did not give him a chance. As long as one was serious, who could not recite the history backwards, he did not give him a chance to show off. Get on the boat. I'll take you to pay respects to the ancestors. The 11 of them set off on the boat. For them, it was not a matter of day or night. With their physique, it was impossible for them to feel tired just from running around. Xuanyuan's style was always swift and decisive. If he could finish something today, he would not delay it until tomorrow. Senior brother Gubei was also known for his seriousness. He immediately led the 10 of them back and forth in Xuanyuan's sacred site. Chapter 178. 1 Guangfeng, the ascension statue of Emperor Xianyuan. Heng Zhoufeng, the giant stone chessboard of 4th ancestor Heng Zhoufeng. Wei Jifeng, the white tiger incarnation of 6th ancestor Wei Ji. There were also other people who had made great contributions to Xianyuan, whether they were still alive or not. Not to mention those who were far away, there were also quite a few who were close by, such as the 3 Qins, Han Peng, Chong Lu, Hu Xiudao, and so on. Lu Xiaoyi's expression was solemn, but he disapproved in his heart. These people had nothing to do with him. Each and every one of them was an old monster who had lived for tens of thousands of years. Even the hair on their legs was thicker than his waist. Xuanyuan's tens of thousands of disciples also had a lot of respect for him. Speaking of which, the current atmosphere in this bandit den was also caused by this group of people, right? This tour took them no less than 3 days in the Snow Dome, letting them know how big Xianyuan was. It was even bigger than a country in their original world, including various sacred sites, some forbidden places, and many architectural styles and uses. On the last day, when they passed by a mountain peak, everyone couldn't help but look at it strangely. This was the only one among the 13 famous peaks in the Snow Dome, as well as the countless less famous peaks. There were no buildings, palaces, pavilions, or anything else. There was only a sacrificial altar, an enormous sacrificial altar. The altar's grandeur lay in the fact that it surrounded the entire mountain. Starting from the foot of the mountain, it was built up in circles. By now, more than 100 layers had been built, and 20% of the lower part of the mountain had been turned into an altar. How much manpower and resources did it take? Looking down from the sky, this wasn't a mountain peak but an altar. The entire mountain peak pierced the sky like an unsheathed longsword. Where is this? Is this an altar? Who is it paying tribute to? The foundation establishment cultivators were very curious, but Lu Xiaoyi was disdainful. Extravagance was a waste of manpower and resources. Wouldn't it be better to use those resources to do something useful for the common people? This is one of the 13 peaks of Xianyuan, Crow Peak. Senior brother Gubei alighted the flying boat and landed in front of the incomparably huge altar. This altar was so big that it would take several months to run around the lower-level mortals. It would also take some time for them to fly. Their expressions were solemn and serene. The aura of the altar on the mountain was so oppressive that it was hard for them to breathe. Every 100 years, the sect will invest manpower and resources to build a higher level. In the past 10,000 years, more than 100 floors have been built. In another few tens of thousands of years, the entire mountain will be filled with altars. Senior Gubei looked dazed. This is a nameless swordsman's sacrifice. They represented the countless swordsman seniors who had died since Xianyuan was established. No one dared to settle down in their resting place, so there was nothing else on the mountain except for the altar. You must remember that this place is not to be desecrated, and those who do will die. There are also many secrets hidden here. What I can tell you is only what you Foundation establishment cultivators should know. When you reach Jindan, you will know more about this place. The higher one's cultivation level was, the more one would know. There was a rumor in Xianyuan that when you reached the level of knowing the secret of Crow Peak, you would not be far from becoming an immortal. I will never know its secret in this lifetime, but it's possible for you. Work hard. Crow Peak's secret? This Xuanyuan's naming was really not that good. It was so old-fashioned. Just by hearing the name, one would not have the desire to know its secret. Lu Xiaoyi thought about it, but he had learned his lesson. He did not show it on his face and lowered his head sincerely, as if his second uncle had died. 3 days later, the 3 procedures were completed. Senior Gu Bei brought them back to the entrance hall. It was still Gu He and Gu Gang who were in charge. Gu Bei clasped his hands. Martial uncles, this disciple has completed his task. The 10 disciples have passed the test and completed all the procedures. Martial uncles, please give your instructions. The 2 looked at the disciples below with satisfaction, especially the kid who spoke strange words. Fortunately, Gu Bei had done his job well. Now this person no longer spoke strange words. Moreover, his attitude was very proper. He stood straight and looked like he knew he was in the wrong and could correct his mistakes. Since you have lit your soul lamps, you are now Xuanyuan's people. In the future, you must love each other in the sect and help each other improve. Gui's long speech made Lu Xiaoyi sleepy. Love each other? Did he say something wrong? Wasn't it killing each other? He did not know why he could not integrate into the sect's atmosphere. He did not know how the others were like. Were they really so willing? This kind of thinking was very inexplicable. Where did it come from? What was the reason? Was it just because of the love for magic? That did not seem to be the case. It was reasonable to say that this kind of place was not bad. A high-grade cultivation star field, a top-notch sect. One could foresee countless cultivation methods and secret techniques, and perhaps very generous benefits. For a cultivator from a low-grade cultivation star field, what was there to be dissatisfied with? Was he possessed? Was he influenced by something? It should not be. There was nothing that could influence him in the low-grade 3-star field. He was always very clear-headed and knew what he was doing. Could it be that it was the countless years in the deep space of the universe? He did not understand. Next, there is a precedent to follow. It is your Dharma name. In Xianyuan, the Dharma name changes every 100 years. My generation is headed by Gu, so there are Gu He, Gu Gang, Gu Bei, etc. Our next generation is you, and the next generation is Guang. The first Dharma name of your generation is Yin. Everyone listened quietly. There was no choice, especially the first word. You can't ask for whatever you like. Lu Xiaoyi was very satisfied with this. His name was too ordinary. Compared to the 9 people who came with him, it was like dregs. It was not that he blamed his parents, but when things were put together, there was a comparison. Especially when the 2 Kuan cultivators' names had the word Xiao. This made him feel very awkward. Now, everyone had returned to the same level. Yin was a very artistic word. In any case, he felt that it was much better than Gu, Guang, Yin locks the pond, the vast expanse of mist, the lingering smoke. It was very artistic, but reality proved that he had thought too much. The first word was fixed as Yin, and the second word was not up to them to choose. Instead, the old pedants in the sect had already decided. They were only waiting for the newcomers to enter the pit, and then they would choose one by one. Those who were at the front had more choices. For people like them, who were a generation that had lived for more than 100 years, there were much fewer Dharma names to choose from. Gu Gang took out a large cauldron. There were many jade slips inside, each with a word. Together with the word yin, that was their Dharma name. They had to draw lots. This was purely a matter of luck. Their poor divine senses couldn't break through the isolation of the cauldron. This was inevitable. Since they had to choose, of course, they couldn't pick. Otherwise, they could just name themselves. Why bother? Gu Gang smiled. Luck is very important in cultivation. All kind of luck. Dharma names are also one of them. Some Dharma names don't sound good, but they contain great luck. In the tens of thousands of years of Xuanyuan's history, this kind of thing is not uncommon. Choose yourselves. Everyone has one Dharma name. Once you take it, you can't exchange it. So they came up one by one. No one fought for it. They all understood that it might not be a good thing to be the first to choose. Staying behind might not mean that they wouldn't be blessed by luck. But there were also those who fought to be the first in everything. For example, Ling Ruofeng was one step ahead. Without hesitation, he stretched out his hand and took out a jade slip with the word Chun written on it. Yin Chun, a very artistic Dharma name. Ling Ruofeng couldn't hold back his smile. He was very satisfied with his luck. Xiao Beinan was the second to make a move. It was the word Yinhe. It seemed a little strange. Zhan Qianjun, Yin Song, perfect. Sima Wan, Yin Gang, a little strange. Mu Jianshun, Yin Yu, good luck. Then it was the Kuan cultivators. They grabbed the other part of the cauldron. The Dharma names of men and women were placed separately. Otherwise, it would be very embarrassing. Qin Erong, Yin Xia, Mu Kaling, Yin Luo, Tang Shaluo, Yin Lu Gong Xiaodai, Yin Dai Lu Xiaoi was a little flustered. Who the hell came up with these names? The word yin, which was so artistic, became like this. Before him, there were cigarette boxes, ashtrays, and tobacco pouches. What would it be when it was his turn? Would he be so unlucky? It seemed that all the unpleasant names had been taken away. There must have been some before. Now 3 had been taken away. What else was there that was unpleasant? He couldn't show that he was timid. He strode forward and stretched out his hand. Instead of stirring like others, he picked up the first jade slip he touched and turned it over. He almost fainted. There was a word clearly written on the jade slip head. Chapter 179. P.S. Today I saw that some readers were spending money on other websites, and I almost broke down. Once again, I want to remind my friends that other than Yin, the author doesn't get a share of the income from other websites. So if you really like this book, please support it. I'll sing a song for you, Cigarette Butt. Lu Xiaoi almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Xianyuan sword faction was incompatible with him. The other Foundation establishment cultivators didn't think much of it, because there was no such thing as cigarettes in their original world. However, cigarettes have been popular in the Fifth Ring for tens of thousands of years. Gu He, Gu Gang, and Gu Bei held back their laughter and didn't say anything. Even if the martial uncle who named it was a bit of a prank, rules were rules. If you took it out, it was yours. There was no room for regret. The heavens had eyes. This was a punishment for this little Foundation establishment cultivator who didn't respect Xianyuan. Gui coughed lightly. So, the matter of entering the sect is settled. Next, there are some trivial matters related to your life, cultivation, and countless other things that you need to understand. These trivial matters can't be explained in a short time. Our Xianyuan will follow the old rules. We'll appoint a senior brother for each of you. They'll be at least 10 years old. Within a month, you can ask all the questions you don't understand. I guarantee that they'll tell you everything they know. Gu Bei, you'll arrange this matter. Find some experienced ones. Teaching between individuals was a tradition in Xianyuan that had been going on for tens of thousands of years. It was an effective method. Not only could it improve the relationship between senior and junior brothers, it could also reduce the workload of the administrators. Especially in the Fifth Ring, there was an endless stream of new disciples. If everything was taught by the Hall Master, then there would be nothing left to do. Therefore, the senior disciples taught the new disciples and helped them quickly familiarize themselves with Xianyuan sword faction's daily operations, cultivation requirements, rules, and taboos, and countless other things. If they had to learn all these things by themselves, even someone as large as Xianyuan wouldn't be able to understand without several years of experience. Throughout the whole process, the only thing that satisfied Lu Xiaoyi was that he didn't announce any commandments in public, which was what he hated most. As an idealistic rice worm, it was his last right to choose between eating rice or noodles, eating this bag or that bag of noodles. Although he knew there would be something like this, he felt dignified, ridiculous dignified, by not announcing it like he was facing a criminal. When Gu Bei led everyone away, Gu He called out to him, "Little junior brother, don't come to the Ascension Hall again after this mission. You should have your own time to relax. I've already arranged for someone else to take your place. Sorry, there's no place for you anymore." Little junior brother? How many years had it been since he had heard such a title from Gu He? Gu Bei understood what he meant. He nodded and left with the others. Gu Bei drove the flying boat to a slightly flat, snowy region. There was still some distance between this place and Xuanyuan's 13 main peaks. The towering snowy peaks weren't so tall that they reached the clouds. They were all small snowy peaks that were thousands of feet high, and many of them were connected by ravines. Gu Bei released a sword message here. This is the abode of the Foundation Establishment disciples of Xianyuan sword faction. There are a few other snowy regions like this, but in principle, all the new disciples in the recent 100 years will be arranged here. Later on, your senior brothers and sisters will come. For the next month, they will be your guides in the Dome. If you have any questions, ask them boldly. After this period, everyone will be busy with cultivation, and no one will have the patience to answer your questions. Don't be embarrassed. The faction will reward them, and it's not purely a contribution. In less than an hour, cultivators came one after another. There were both men and women, and they were led by Gu Bei. Gong Xiaodai, oh no, she should be called Yanai now. Lu Xiaoyi privately called her the tobacco pouch. She was the infant mother who came from the same world as him. Before leaving, she glared at him fiercely before leaving with his senior sister. Lu Xiaoyi sighed again. This was an unlucky year. Nothing seemed to be going well after coming to this lousy place. He couldn't leave, his perverted hands were discovered, and his Dharma name was a joke. How was he going to pass his days? He also understood why Gong Xiaodai found out that it was his hand. It wasn't that she saw it, but that he had apologized at that time. After that, he spoke a little more, and that was why she found out. This made him understand another principle. If you did something bad, you should never say sorry. If you did it, nothing would happen. However, if you apologized again, you would be asking for trouble. However, this tobacco pouch felt really good. He wondered if it was fed to her by the spirit salamander. Seeing that he was the last one again, Lu Xiaoyi lamented his fate. It was all because of his mouth. Why did he ask so many questions when he knew that the possibility was low? In the end, he attracted revenge and kept getting kicked in the foot. He even suspected that the cauldron could be controlled and that it was the doing of the two Ascension Hall masters. When he got rich and got promoted, he would definitely get back at them. The butt of a cigarette was the butt of a cigarette. Was there anything more unpleasant than that? That wasn't all. Now that he was the last one, he didn't know what kind of senior brother would teach him a lesson. He had to endure it, just 1 month. Then, he would thoroughly cultivate his body and mind and disappear from Xianyuan Sword Sect's large group of Foundation Establishment cultivators. He would never let anyone catch him again. Gu Bei patted the flying boat. Let's go. I'll take you around and see if there's a cave residence you like. Lu Xiaoyi's face was bitter. Senior brother, everyone else has a guide. Am I the only one who doesn't? Gu Bei's expression was calm. Your guide is me. Don't act pitiful in front of me. I know you haven't given up on learning the Dharma. You can fool others, but you can't fool me. Lu Xiaoyi had no choice but to board the flying boat. Although Gu Bei's realm wasn't high, he was very meticulous. He realized that he was still very inexperienced in front of these old swordsmen. However, there was no need to belittle himself. Since he was from the Gu generation, even if he joined the sect in the last year of his generation, there was a gap of 3 generations. He should be at least 250 years old now, right? He really had a long life. There was a difference of at least 200 years between him and the others. It wasn't shameful to have a difference in experience. This time, Gu Bei slowed down and circled around the snowy peaks, introducing the advantages and disadvantages of each snowy peak to Chu Li. The old man was very serious about the number of cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi admired him for this. Do you have any personal requests? Or do you have any special hobbies? Are you willing to stay at the top of the mountain? Halfway up the mountain? Bottom of the mountain? Is it near or far from the main peak? Do you want more or less fellow disciples around you? Do you like lively or quiet places? Do you like the scenery? Do you like snowy scenery, mountain scenery, or forest scenery? There are many choices, but there's one thing. Places with hot springs are already occupied. You're too late. Lu Xiaoyi had been hanging out with this old man for a few days. He realized that this person might be a typical workaholic and the most fanatical swordsman. Although his cultivation wasn't very good, he felt like a fanatic swordsman. The fanatic here was a fanatic love for swords. There was no need to beat around the bush with people like this. Being direct was the best way to communicate with them. It was the fastest way to achieve one's goal without tiring. The cave residence was very important. He might have to stay here for at least 100 years, or even longer. Therefore, there was no need to hide it. Besides, his request wasn't too much. Chapter 180. Senior Marshal Brother, since you've asked for my request, I'll be frank with you and save everyone's time. Since you're flying over one mountain after another, we don't have to do anything else this month except find a place to play. I don't want the mountains to be high or low, and I don't want any special scenery. The distance from a main peak doesn't matter either, but I do want 2 things. Absolute silence. It's best if there's a flat piece of land and not just a cave. That's all. I don't have high expectations, right? Gu Bei pulled the boat's bow and sped off in a direction. There's no such thing as absolute silence. You're just a small foundation establishment cultivator. Do you think it's possible for no one to disturb you forever? However, there are still some relatively quiet places. If I consider your request for a flat piece of land, I can think of 3 places. Let's go take a look. With a goal in mind, their speed increased a lot. In the end, Lu Xiaoyi picked a place. To be precise, this place could no longer be considered a mountain. Not to mention 1,000 feet. It wasn't even 100 feet. It wasn't suitable for the adventurous nature of ordinary cultivators. It was a huge snowpack, a flat top. Because the mound was too short, it could only accommodate 1 cave. Because it was remote and far from the surrounding snowy peaks, it was not on the route back to the main peak. Basically, very few people would purposely come to this place unless they were looking for it on purpose. There were no hot springs, no forests, and only a glacier not far away. Snow water mixed with ice rolled down, making it a little noisy. Lu Xiaoyi was more satisfied with this place. The silence he was talking about referred to the silence of few people. He had a high tolerance for the movements of nature. This was the after effect of his soul drifting in the universe for a long time. Gu Bei placed a sword talisman here. It would emit a weak spiritual aura to indicate that someone was occupying it. When you're familiar with the sword talisman's usage, you can make one yourself. I'll be busy these few days with a tight schedule. You can tidy up the cave at night and think about what you've gained these few days. Think about your future. What do you need and what should you do? I'll come and pick you up tomorrow morning. Settling down is only the first step. There's still a lot of other things to do. After Gu Bei left, Lu Xiaoyi looked at his new home, speechless. The mound stood there without any cover, and the cave was at the bottom of the mound. Because no one lived in it for many years, it was extremely dilapidated, and half of it was blocked by snow. He knew that things like the Immortals' Cave required the support of formations. Unfortunately, he only knew about spirit-gathering formations. The rest would take some time. It took him about 2 hours to tidy up the cave, but it was completely empty. There wasn't even a single decent piece of furniture. He sighed. He didn't want to stay cooped up in the cave, so he simply went to the dirt mound and lay down on the bed. The temperature of the Cheongding mountain range was very low. Normal people would not be able to endure it here, even if they went into the cave. However, it was different for cultivators. Lu Xiaoyi channeled his mana and used the Jade, Clear Middle Peace Imperial Edict of the Chi Eater stage to resist the cold. The night sky was clear and full of stars. There was no light in the surroundings. There was only the sound of ice colliding with the river not far away. There was no family, no friends, no one to talk to. There was only himself. A sense of loneliness welled up in his heart. This was a familiar feeling. After experiencing more than 10 years of familial love in the human world, he finally returned to his original self. There were too many things that he couldn't bring up. However, if he had to find the most important thing, it must be a cultivation method. He needed a cultivation method for the foundation establishment stage. He couldn't use a cultivation method for the Chi Eater stage to make up the numbers. Lu Xiaoyi was very clear that no matter what his preferences or dreams were, if he couldn't practice the Xianyuan sword sect well, everything else would be just a dream. He thought a lot, but found that it was useless. He didn't know anything about this sect, the Sword Veins Tao, or the swordsman's way of doing things. What was the use of thinking about these things now? He lacked the basic knowledge to judge. Back to the cave, sleep. He hadn't had a good sleep for more than 3 years. At least in his new home, he had to be more casual. He dreamed of his original world again, the barren spiritual energy of heaven and earth, the life of cultivation without anyone to supervise him, the pain and joy of exploring alone, his wife, second sister Li, and the care of his 2 closest relatives. He shouldn't dream. Cultivators could control their own mental state, but he indulged himself that night. He swore that this would be his last time. He promised his mother that he wouldn't cut off the Lu bloodline. Since he had no intention of passing it down to the next generation, he had to live on, even if he had to do it in a way that he didn't like. He shouldn't hold on to his old way of cultivation, at least before he obtained true freedom. He should be a real swordsman. Early in the morning, Lu Xiaoyi was cultivating on top of the bun. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth was abundant, so abundant that he couldn't imagine it. However, the effect was very poor. Chi Eater and Foundation Establishment were fundamentally different. One was spiritual energy, while the other was magic energy. The body's condition was also very different. This caused the effect of his magic energy to be minimal. Delicious food was right in front of him, but he found that his esophagus was too narrow. He could only lick it. This feeling was driving him crazy. He still persisted in his cultivation. When he opened his eyes, he found the diligent senior, Brother Gu Bei, standing in front of him. Cigarette, but you use this kind of cultivation method to build your foundation? You don't have any more foundation establishment techniques? Lu Xiaoyi protested. Senior brother, can you not call me by my Dharma name? In any case, we're considered acquaintances. Isn't it more intimate to call me by my name? Gu Bei was unmoved. You should slowly familiarize yourself with everything in Xianyuan. Don't stay in your past fantasies. That includes your Dharma name. I can call you by your real name, but can you make sure that everyone who knows you is close to you? Even your future enemies will affectionately call you Lu Xiaoyi. The earlier you get familiar with it, the better. You'll slowly get used to it. Actually, it's just that. Besides, what's wrong with cigarette butt? I heard that in Xianyuan, there are even people who quit smoking. I just don't know who it is. In that case, your Dharma name is actually very lucky. Think about it. Such a unique Dharma name. It's the only one among thousands of Dharma names in the cauldron. How did you manage to get it? Can I say that it was the 2 hall masters who were secretly playing tricks? Lu Xiaoyi ridiculed his heart. However, he had already decided to properly mingle around here, so he did not refute. Was it not worth spending time on such an insignificant matter? Senior brother, I'm an itinerant cultivator. You also know that the cultivation environment of itinerant cultivators can't be compared to that of those with the sex roots. We're also a low-level cultivation planet, so it's very difficult. There's only one cultivation technique. I used all my savings to buy it from the Jade, Clear Middle Peace Imperial Decree. To be honest, I can't be picky. It wasn't just cultivation techniques, but also magical techniques, escape techniques, and the six senses technique. Everything was bought from small shops, the kind that cost a few low-grade spirit stones. I don't need to tell you the names, but you should know what kind of goods they are. My foundation establishment was very coincidental. After I formed my foundation, I directly joined the Realm Ascension ferryboat. I thought that I could start from scratch with a brand new orthodoxy and a brand new cultivation technique. Therefore, I didn't practice anything. I just wanted to wait for the best. I thought that I would go to a mid-level cultivation planet called Morning Light, but it was intercepted by your fifth ring. Therefore, as you can see, I'm still using the cultivation technique to cultivate. Other than not feeling cold anymore, there's basically no effect. Therefore, if you bring me to familiarize me with Xianyuan today, can we first pick out the most basic cultivation technique? Do the cultivation techniques and secret techniques of the sect cost spirit stones? Right now, I'm penniless. If I want to spend spirit stones, can I first borrow some from the sect? When I have more money, I'll return it. Chapter 181. Gubei was silent for a moment. Behind every individual cultivator, there was a bitter and difficult story. Cultivating to the point where there were no cultivation methods, no spirit stones, and no orthodoxy was also very strange. But then again, only a blank piece of paper could draw the most beautiful picture. Perhaps this was the beginning of this cigarette, but's bitterness and sweetness? You might not understand what kind of place Xianyuan is. Let me tell you, Xianyuan Sword School has been established for tens of thousands of years, but it has never collected a single spirit stone from its disciples. Whether it's cultivation methods, swordsmanship, or Immortal's Cave, never. Aside from being worried that you'll bite off more than you can chew, so you'll be restricted in terms of level and quantity, everything else is open. If you're willing, we could go to Wenguang Peak's Pham Lu or Chinchou Peak's Bo Ao Pavilion right now. Over there, just by relying on your identity as a Xianyuan swordsman, you can face tens of thousands of cultivation methods and swordsmanship. You can choose and use them as you wish. In Xianyuan Sword School, no one ever felt that there was a lack of cultivation methods and swordsmanship. The disciples' only complaint was that there were too many cultivation methods and swordsmanship was too profound. They'd rather have fewer, at least they wouldn't be blinded by their choices. This is Xianyuan. If you have the ability, you can learn 10,000 types. As for basic cultivation methods, all of Xuanyuan's basic cultivation methods lead directly to the Great Tao. There are systems and inheritances, and the only end point along this path is the immortal realm. Those that don't lead directly to the Great Tao aren't worthy of being placed on Xuanyuan's bookshelves. If it were a young foundation establishment cultivator who is only a few decades old, these words would definitely make his blood boil. But Lu Xiaoyi wasn't. Adding to that the countless years he'd been drifting in the universe, he didn't even know how long he'd lived. His body might only be 30 years, but his spirit was immeasurable. He knew that Gu Bei's words had their basis, but they weren't necessarily true. Cultivation included countless directions. Not using spirit stones or hard work didn't conform to the essence of cultivation. Then what are we waiting for? Let's go now. I'm lacking a cultivation method right now, so we can't delay. Gu Bei stopped him as he was about to climb onto the flying boat. Wait, before you choose a cultivation method, you must first determine your direction. Dafa Xiang Wuji, what cultivation method do you choose? Wasn't that just fooling around? Come, I'll tell you about the direction of Xuanyuan's orthodoxy. 3 days later, you'll have the opportunity to make your choice. After you've made your choice, I'll take you to pick out some cultivation methods and secret techniques. Lu Xiaoyi understood in his heart. He knew that this would be the case. After the old man finished making the promise, he began to shirk the responsibility and find all kinds of excuses. Fine, I've endured it for a few years. I'll wait 3 more days. Let's see what else you have to say then. He believed in the strength of the fifth ring sects, but the moment they opened their mouths, they talked about tens of thousands of cultivation methods and secret techniques, and even said that each of them led directly to the Great Tao. Were they treating him like a child who didn't know better? Gu Bei said solemnly, My Xianyuan is different from other Taoist sections. Other Taoist sects have countless branches. Dafa has tens of branches, while smaller sects have hundreds. For example, the so-called Taoist school of Supreme Taoism's outstanding talents. The three clear Taoist schools are all like this. Actually, they were scattered but not together. They were like a bunch of loose sand. They knew everything, but they were all sloppy. My Xianyuan doesn't learn from them. Lu Xiaoyi quietly listened to Gu Bei trample on others. This couldn't be more normal. Those of the same trade were enemies. Looking down on each other was a normal mentality in the cultivation world. He was listening to Gu Bei trample on the three clear ones. So the new foundation establishment cultivators who had gone to the Supreme Taoist sects must also be listening to the Taoist sects trample on the swordsmen. Trampling on others was healthier. After trampling on Taoist sects, Gu Bei went straight to the point. Xianyuan only has two directions. It was like this tens of thousands of years ago, and it's still the same now. Xianyuan is divided into the inner and outer sword. The inner sword lineage and the outer sword lineage. The inner sword, cultivators cultivate their sword pellet in their Naiwan palace. It's formless and without substance. The Alcade sword is unstoppable. It starts at the impermanence and ends at the Dafa. The outer sword, cultivators cultivate their flying swords in their sword sheaths. It has form and without substance. It's long and can strike far away. It can rush back and forth with the strength of 1,000 caddies. It can cut rivers and split mountains. Only when you're sure of which direction you want to go can you take the next step in choosing cultivation methods and sword techniques. In terms of cultivation methods, the inner and outer swords are different. They focus on different areas and overlap. They're 50% similar. In terms of sword techniques, they're completely different. They're basically two extremes. Thus, the direction is very important. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Then he asked a question that almost every new cultivator would ask. Which one is powerful? Quick to see results? Easy to deal with? Easy to get started? Gu Bei sighed. When he first entered the sect, he had also asked the same question. In the end, he had been fiercely taught a lesson by the senior brother who had guided him. It was as if it had happened yesterday. It's impossible for the things you've mentioned to coexist. The powerful ones will definitely put in more effort, more time, and more unremitting effort. In theory, there's no difference between the inner sword and the outer sword. It all depends on one's innate talent and strength. However, in my Xianyuan sword school, people advocate the inner sword more, but the number of people who cultivate the outer sword is much higher than the inner sword. Lu Xiaoyi didn't understand. Why? Isn't this contradictory? Gu Bei sighed. Because the threshold for the inner sword is too high. It requires the approval of the sword pill. If you can't get the approval of the sword pill, you can only obediently learn the outer sword. There's no threshold for the outer sword. Anyone can learn it. 3 days later, there'll be a sword selection assembly. You new disciples, as well as some previous disciples, will participate. Whoever can obtain the sword pill will enter the inner sword. If you can't, then make the outer sword your lifelong goal. Or wait until the next time to try your luck. The sect has rules. All Xianyuan disciples only have 2 chances to choose the sword pill. If you can't succeed in both attempts, you can only enter the outer sword lineage. This is only a matter of choice, not a matter of superiority. It doesn't mean that the outer sword is necessarily weaker than the inner sword. Lu Xiaoyi understood. He had some experience, so how could he not understand the meaning behind it? Saying that there was no superiority between the inner sword and the outer sword was just to not destroy the unity of the sect. It was like a big meal. There were spirit beast meat and vegetables. Could you say that vegetables could fill your stomach just because you couldn't get the spirit beast meat? The number of sword pills is very small compared to the number of cultivators, right? He quickly grasped the crux of the problem. Yes, this problem has troubled Xianyuan for tens of thousands of years. There hasn't been a proper solution. Gu Bei was slightly embarrassed. Does the sword pill have its own intelligence? So the sword pill chooses and not the other way around? When Lu Xiaoyi put aside his prejudices, his insight was still very sharp. That's not entirely the case. To be precise, this is a two-way selection process. The sword pill chooses the person, and the person chooses the sword pill. But if you think about it carefully, it seems that the sword pill is more inclined to choose the person. As long as the sword pill shows its intention to get close to a cultivator, basically no cultivator will reject it. Especially for people like you who choose for the first time. It was still the sword pill that chose the person. These two problems were actually the same problem. The reason why there were so few sword pills and why they were in short supply was because they needed to contain intelligence. If they didn't have intelligence, then they were just ordinary iron. It had nothing to do with the material. Chapter 182. How to Nurture the Spirit. Xuanyuan's method was to nurture the spirit in the microcosm of the sword tomb. However, humans could not enter the microcosm of the sword tomb, and there was no way to control it. Generations of swordsmen in Xuanyuan had been trying to modify the microcosm of the sword tomb. It was not that they had not succeeded in increasing the production of sword pills in the microcosm of the sword tomb. However, they later realized that the sword pills produced this way were not as good as the ones produced naturally. Xuanyuan's internal sword vein was the cornerstone of the sect, its reputation, and its core of fighting power. How could the quality of the sword pills be flawed? Some cultivators' methods of interfering with the microcosm of the sword tomb violated this process. Human factors were mixed in, and there was only one consequence: losing the natural nature of the sword. In the long years of cultivation, Xuanyuan's internal sword sect had found other ways to nurture the sword pills. However, they later realized that the quality of the sword pills produced was far inferior to that of the microcosm of the sword tomb. This included other sword vein orthodoxies and other nurturing methods. Later, swordsmen discovered that the origin of the sword pills was actually complementary to the philosophy of the sword vein. For example, Xuanyuan's philosophy and the microcosm of the sword tomb, Firmament sword sect's philosophy and the sword refining spring. It was difficult to completely separate them. If they had to do so, the result would be neither fish nor fowl. This led to a problem. Should they nurture a large number of internal swordsmen without distinguishing between the good and the bad? Or should they follow the traditional method of maintaining the elite internal swordsmen and the external swordsmen who won by numbers? Because of this, Xuanyuan's internal sword sect was divided into two factions, and they argued endlessly. In the end, Xuanyuan's founder, Xianyuan the Great, came to a conclusion. The sword pills should only be produced from the microcosm of the sword tomb, and the rest should be destroyed. This was a decisive judgment that allowed the internal sword vein to survive the dispute. Otherwise, Xianyuan would have been dominated by internal swords, and there would be no place for the external swords. This judgment also allowed Xianyuan to develop rapidly. The internal and external swords worked together and competed with each other. They developed and grew to this day by seeking common ground while reserving differences. By now, the swordsmen had completely understood the philosophy of the patriarch of Xianyuan. The reason why the inner swords were strong was because of the sharpness of the sword pellets. If the sword pellets were used indiscriminately, the number of inner swords would increase, but the quality would decrease. This would cause the outer swords to decline, and the gains would not make up for the losses. It was better to use the external sword for quantity and the internal sword for quality. Complementing each other was the best strategy. With Gu Bei's explanation, Lu Xiaoyi finally understood the origin of Xuanyuan swordsmen's two directions. Of course, he would choose the inner sword. If they didn't eat dragon meat, who would eat grass? He realized that his emotions were a little strange. Ever since he entered Xianyuan, he had an inexplicable resistance. He wasn't someone who didn't know what was good for him. He had a clear grasp of his own situation. It was his blessing to be able to come to such a place. One must know how to respect others and not push one's luck. Why did he favor Dharma meridians so much? Why did he inexplicably reject the sword vein? With his personality, he could live forever in either direction, so it didn't matter which one he chose. Why did he always have such contradictory thoughts? Was it because he had such a split personality? Or was there something in the unseen world that affected him? He told himself that he couldn't let these emotions continue to spread. His star in Xianyuan was terrible. There was no need for him to feel this way. This wasn't something a rational person should do. They sat on a flying boat and circled around the Cheongding mountain range. With just one look, it was obvious that they were guiding a newcomer. This was because the other swordsmen were all riding on swords. None of them were greedy for pleasure. Gu Bei began to guide Lu Xiaoyi in detail about the various main peaks and main halls, as well as the functions of each hall, where he could go and where it was best to avoid. He was very detailed, and Lu Xiaoyi was finally no longer brooding over his previous punishment. A serious and selfless person was always respected. However, his thoughts were still on the sword pellet. Senior brother, what level do you think the spiritual intelligence of the sword pellet has reached? If it's compared to a human, what is its approximate age? Your analogy is not appropriate. The spiritual intelligence of a spiritual object and a human's spiritual intelligence are two different concepts. A human's spiritual intelligence encompasses too many things: the secular world, the mortal world, kinship, cultivation, nature, knowledge of the world, the distinction between good and evil, the pursuit of ideals, and so on. However, the spiritual intelligence of a sword pellet is very pure and unique. It was formed in the small world of the sword catacomb. How could it understand the concept of good and evil? Therefore, its spiritual intelligence is its understanding of power, Tao, and nature. It's a kind of spiritual intelligence that belongs to its instincts. It doesn't care if you're a good person, evil person, or a lazy person. As long as it feels right, it will recognize you. Every sword pellet is different. I understand what you mean. You just want to know if there's any way to make the sword spirit like you. I can tell you clearly that there's no way. He could only try his luck. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. However, among so many sword pellets, could it be that there wasn't one that he liked and wanted to become a sword insect? I understand now. In the Ascension Hall, Martial Uncle Gu, he was the inner sword because the sword pellet was hidden in his head. Martial Uncle Gu Gang was the outer sword because he carried a sword case. Senior brother Gu Bei must also be the inner sword because you didn't carry a sword case. Am I right? Gu Bei shook his head with a bleak expression. Martial uncles, you guessed right, but I guessed wrong. Sword pellets aren't that easy to capture. Every time, there are many participants. There are newcomers like you. And there are also those who would rather train bitterly for a few years to increase their cultivation before capturing a sword pellet. There are all kinds of fantastic ideas, but unfortunately, they are all useless in front of the sword pellet. The sword pellet is a sword spirit. Its choice has nothing to do with dermic powers, cultivation, or even willpower. It's something in the unseen world. Other than trying our luck, there's no other way. This is also the reason why an inner swordsman has always been stronger than an outer swordsman for tens of thousands of years. Apart from possessing a sword pellet, the sword pellet can always find an extremely small group of people who are compatible with the sword. He felt that he had spilled the beans, but when he looked at Lu Xiaoyi again, it was as if he hadn't heard him. It was impossible for him not to have heard him. He was just playing dumb. In a short few days he had been in Xianyuan, he had already learned how to survive. It was an open secret that the inner and outer swords of Xianyuan were stronger. Anyone who had stayed in Xianyuan for a period of time would understand. However, understanding was one thing, but it couldn't be said. This was because it would affect unity. The majority of cultivators in Xuanyuan sword faction were outer swords. This was also a fact. I'm an outer sword. It's not that I want to be an outer sword. It's that I failed to capture a sword pellet twice. The second time, I missed by a hair's breadth. Rules are rules, and this is also my fate. Swordsmen shouldn't believe in fate, but how can there be absolutes in this world? There are tens of thousands of outer sword foundation establishment cultivators in the dome. How many of them didn't have to switch to outer swords because they failed to capture a sword pellet? I don't count for much among them. I can only say that this sword pellet is too strange. It's completely unpredictable. But now I'm an outer sword. My feelings for the outer sword aren't any weaker than the yearning I had for the inner sword when I first entered Xinyuan. Chapter 183. Xuanyuan's 13 Peaks, Wenguang, Hangzhou, Weiji, Hidden Sword, Qingshou, Dingjun, Qianxiu, Yidang, Jilao, Shenzhou, Shizhao, Jiangzi. Wenguang Peak was the peak that commemorated the founding ancestor, Xinyuan the Great. Xinyuan the Great was known as Wenguang when he was still immortal. It was the core of Xinyuan, where important matters were decided. The sword vein was the foundation of Xinyuan, the Zhongjian lineage. Hangzhou Peak was the story of the fourth ancestor, Jiang Hangzhou, who was famous for creating the Yijian lineage. Weiji Peak came from the sixth ancestor, Weiji. The killing sword lineage was famous in the inner sword. These three peaks were all inner sword peaks. From this, it could be seen that the inner sword's position in Xinyuan was unquestionable. Not a single outer sword ancestor had a turn. As for the other 10 peaks, other than Crow Peak, which was a memorial peak, the remaining 9 were all outer sword peaks. It could be imagined that the outer sword's position in Xinyuan was not dispensable. Its large base was frightening. The inner sword walked the path of the elite, while the outer sword walked the path of the storm. In any case, that was how Lu Xiaoyi understood it. In these few days, Lu Xiaoyi also went to a few places that he would come in contact with more frequently in the future. For example, there were a few larger markets within the dome, the outer storehouse, and most of the things he needed for cultivation. There were more than 20,000 Foundation establishment swordsmen in Xuanyuan's sword faction. Such a large number of people could not be settled by a single market. There was also the Tongji Hall, a place where resources were distributed to Foundation establishment cultivators. Under Gu Bei's guidance, he used his sword talisman to receive the newcomer's benefits: 100 mid-grade spirit stones and 10 bottles of 2 types of medicinal pills. In the future, the resources would be distributed once every 6 months, and it would be roughly the same amount. If it still wasn't enough, then he would have to think of a way himself. In Lu Xiaoyi's original world, he had also obtained this kind of basic resource, but it didn't last long. When the red thread worms were swept clean, he lost his source of resources. It was a one-time deal, and it was not as good as a long-term business here. However, how much purchasing power such a resource had in this world was still a question. Paper in Luoyang was expensive, while Tokyo was expensive, so it was hard to say. Living people couldn't be suffocated to death by urine. With such a large base of cultivators, there was always something they could do to earn some extra money. These were things for the future, and there was no need to consider them for now. There were many other places, such as the Law Hall. Gu Bei was worried that he would cause trouble, so he brought him there. Of course, there were no dungeons or chains. In Gu Bei's words, swordsmen did not need those. The Law Hall was a thatched hut. It was a small place, and it was dilapidated. There was not a single person in sight. Lu Xiaoyi did not understand. Senior apprentice brother? Where are the people? The management of tens of thousands of people in this place. Gu Bei said proudly, "Yes, this is the place. But if there's a need, there are protectors everywhere. For example, if you do something you shouldn't do, I will directly capture you." Lu Xiaoyi did not understand. There has to be something clear, something that people can follow, right? For example, senior apprentice brother, if you have your own selfish motives, I'm just giving an example. Why do you have to act against me? I don't even know who to complain to. Gu Bei smiled. Sect rules? They were abolished 5,000 years ago. This is the reason why no one has announced to you how many rules there are ever since you entered the sect. For example, if you had the opportunity to establish a sect, you would need to establish some rules. How many rules can you come up with? Lu Xiaoyi opened his mouth and said, "Isn't that simple? There are many rules. For example, you are not allowed to deceive your master or ancestors. You are not allowed to kill your fellow disciples. You are not allowed to collude with external forces. You are not allowed to deceive your superiors and subordinates. You are not allowed to invade other people's cave abodes. You are not allowed to seize other people's resources. There are too many rules. I can easily list dozens of them. Gu Bei laughed. Look, you're only a few decades old, but you already know all these. The basic requirement to enter Xianyuan is to build your foundation. Tell me, can you find one person in 10,000 who doesn't understand these principles? Even if there are countless rules and you recite them every day, you will still pretend that you don't understand if you don't want to. Even if Xianyuan doesn't have a single rule, if you take Xianyuan as your home, which rule don't you know? It's like a family. How would you treat your parents, siblings, and children? Therefore, Xianyuan Sword Sect doesn't have any rules. You have to do as you see fit. If you exceed the cultivator's understanding, there will naturally be someone to deal with you. Lu Xiaoyi smiled wryly. Without rules, there's no way to determine the wrong sentence. Gu Bei was very natural. What punishment? Xianyuan only has two kinds of punishments. One is fine, and the other is to kill. Who would have the patience to convict you? Lu Xiaoyi sighed again. This was a typical bandit's way of doing things. It was all based on the cultivator's self-awareness. Did they really believe in the power of the sword? Did they really think that just because they were swordsmen, that they could obtain things directly and not in a straight line, It definitely wasn't that simple. Relying on self-awareness was only one aspect. There was also the hidden power. After all, in the cultivation world, the strongest fist was the absolute truth. It wasn't something that could be done just because you wore the skin of a law enforcement disciple. After 3 days, under Gu Bei's indoctrination, he knew a lot. This was very important for someone who had never joined a sect before. However, knowing was one thing. How to be like a fish in water was another. This was something that no one could teach. Senior apprentice brother, I have a rather personal question. I don't know if I should ask. Gu Bei gave him a sidelong glance. What are you pretending for? All your questions over the past few days, which one of them isn't personal? Do you really think that you're cultivating for Xianyuan? You're doing it for yourself. However, don't forget to give yourself a platform for opportunities after you've achieved something. Lu Xiaoyi chuckled. After a few days, he had a better understanding of Xuanyuan style. It could be Gu Bei style, and vice versa, regardless of whether he was pretending to be free and uninhibited, or whether Xianyuan swordsman was really like that. At least he knew how to deal with such people. This wasn't his 30-odd years of experience in the cultivation world, but the experience from his previous life. Although he didn't even know who he was, senior apprentice brother, the dome area is so big, and there are countless halls. It's magnificent, but in my opinion, they're all two grand places. Isn't there a place that's even more mundane? For example, drinking wine? Playing for money? Relaxing the tension of cultivation. Gu Bei looked at him. After a few breaths, he reprimanded. You just want to know where the brothel is, right? Why are you talking about mundane things with me? Drinking wine and playing for money? Lu Xiaoyi was a little embarrassed. My body, hair, and skin are all given to me by my parents. I can't easily abandon them. I have to make the best use of them. If I don't use them for a long time, my blood and qi will stagnate, and the expansion and contraction of my tendons and meridians will be affected. Therefore, Gu Bei had been in this position for more than 50 years. His situation was a little complicated. He couldn't ascend the Jin Dan because of his own reasons, and also because he had injured his foundation in battle. 50 years ago, after countless attacks, he felt that he had no fate with the Great Tao. Therefore, he stayed in the Visitation Hall, a hall that managed Foundation establishment cultivators, to do some guiding work. It was a relatively easy position in the Visitation Hall, and it was usually given to experienced and patient old cultivators. Chapter 184. In the past 50 years, he had received countless newcomers and sent them to capture sword orbs. Most of them had failed, and only a few had succeeded. Gu Bei felt that the few who had succeeded had a unique temperament. It was only after he had successfully captured a sword orb and entered the inner sword lineage that he slowly understood what this meant. Only extraordinary people could do extraordinary things. This was his last time receiving a newcomer. The Lu Xiaoyi in front of him also had a unique temperament, but it was different from before. Gu Bei couldn't quite put his finger on it. He was like an unwilling duck. Among the hundreds of people he had received, there were those who chattered endlessly about sword orbs. There were also those who pretended to be relaxed and changed the topic. There were those who were 100 times more confident that they would definitely capture a sword orb. There were also those who were worried about their gains and losses and lacked confidence. There were also those who gave up on capturing a sword orb to strengthen themselves first. However, on the day before the sword orb was to be captured, this was the first person who was still thinking about where to go to a brothel. "Aren't you worried?" Lu Xiaoyi didn't understand. "Should I be worried? Didn't you say that capturing a sword orb is only a process of communication between the human and the sword orb? It's not dangerous, and there won't be fighting and killing. In the worst-case scenario, if I fail to capture a sword orb, I'll join a mighty team of outer swordsmen and not eat or drink. You also said that in a cultivator's lifetime, they might not always choose the best. The most suitable one is the best. If I can't become an inner sword, I'll become an outer sword. If I can't become an outer sword, I'll carry a sword. As long as the spirit of a swordsman exists, what does it matter if I practice the sword or not?" Thus, Gu Bei knew that this brat was still obsessed with his technique. The next day, Gu Bei brought him to a spacious area at the foot of Wenguang Peak. It felt a bit like the foreign arenas in Lu Xiaoyi's previous life, except that it was bigger. However, there were no spectator seats. It had a diameter of more than 2,000 feet. It was circular and had no roof. Around it were hundreds of huge, arched pillars with various sword patterns carved on them. This was a huge spirit design that had yet to be activated. Although Lu Xiaoyi did not understand the principles behind this spirit design, it did not stop him from making a judgment. There were already quite a number of people, at least 100, and there were still people coming in an endless stream. Most of them were new foundation establishment cultivators who had just entered the sect recently and were relatively inexperienced. They stood in the crowd and looked around. There were also some who looked like veterans. These were cultivators who had already been here once, and this was their last chance. In the end, Gu Bei reminded them, "After you enter, just stand separately. Don't mix with others to prevent misunderstandings when the sword pills fly over. Don't talk too much with others. This isn't a place for idle chatter. It concerns your entire life, so you can't neglect it." In the initial stage of the sword pellet, there would be a period of frenzy in an unfamiliar environment. Don't try to communicate with them at this time. It would be a waste of energy and a waste of energy. Don't be picky about the sword pill's attributes. Although metal was the most expensive element in the sword orb, followed by fire, earth, wood, and water, this was something that only high-tier swordsmen would consider. It's good to have a newcomer like you, especially the trip to Shuemu. You can lay a good foundation for the future. Once there's a chance, the sword pellet will enter your Naiwan. Do you know where your Naiwan is? You have to deal with it carefully. Don't try to be brave. If you can't do it, just give up and find the next one. Although the sword pellet won't actively harm people, if it's too forceful during the process of entering a cultivator's Naiwan, it will hurt the person's mind. For tens of thousands of years in Xianyuan, accidents would occasionally occur during the process of capturing sword pellets. The most common situation was that the sword pellet would turn the cultivator's spirit into mush. You'll become an idiot. Cigarette, but I'm warning you. If that really happens, you have no relatives or friends here. No one will be able to raise you. You can only be sent to the foot of the mountain to raise pigs. Lu Xiaoyi was speechless. "Senior Marshal Brother, don't scare me, okay? If you warn people like this, it'll have the opposite effect." He took 2 steps forward, full of confidence. Suddenly, he stopped and turned around. "Senior Marshal Brother, if I'm gifted and capture 2 or 3 sword pellets at once, what should I do? Should I take one, or should I take all of them?" This time, it was Gu Bei's turn to be speechless. "You're thinking too much." In the history of Xianyuan, was there really a situation where a newcomer could obtain more than 1 sword pellet at once? Of course there was, but in reality, this kind of amazement was only temporary. As time passed, the cultivators who obtained more than 1 sword pellet at once didn't have a smooth path. It seemed like their achievements were limited. On the other hand, those who took things one step at a time, obtained 1 sword pellet, refined one more, and refined one more until the 5 elemental sword pellets were all gathered. This was basically the case among the high-ranking internal swordsmen in Xianyuan. Therefore, the higher-ups didn't encourage this kind of talent. Thinking about this kid's various strange things, Gubei actually still hoped that he could succeed. This way, he could draw a perfect conclusion to his final life as a guide. Such a strange guy. He must have a special side to him, right? Who could say for sure? Lu Xiaoyi leisurely walked into the field and found that his companions were also there. Cigarette boxes, ashtrays, and tobacco pipes. However, he didn't go over to interact with them. In fact, they didn't have much of friendship. Moreover, when these people saw him, they all turned their heads to the side. Their intentions were very obvious. Of course, he wouldn't go over and ask for a snub, especially that tobacco pipe. After another hour, those who should have come had all arrived. This kind of occasion concerned their own future, so no one would be late. Several figures suddenly appeared in the field. They were so fast that the Foundation establishment cultivators didn't know how they got there. One of them didn't say much. He waved his hand, and the hundreds of arched pillars lit up one by one, emitting a gentle light. The Foundation establishment cultivators in the field didn't feel anything strange. Before they came, their masters and guides had said very clearly that the formation was to isolate the sword pellets and prevent them from escaping. It wasn't targeted at cultivators. When the formation was completely formed, an upper-level cultivator took out an ancient cauldron and lightly shouted, "Guard your heart. Everyone be careful." He patted the restriction on the cauldron. Instantly, dozens of rays of light flew out, rushing left and right in the formation. They were so fast that the Foundation establishment cultivators' divine sense couldn't keep up with them at all. Everyone knew that this was the beginning of the sword pellets frenzy, so they ignored them. After a while, probably knowing that they couldn't escape this space, the sword pellets began to slow down. Sword lights of various colors began to circulate in the space, roaming freely. The capture officially began. They didn't jump up and grab the sword pellets with their hands. Instead, they tried to communicate with the sword pellets through their divine sense to see if they could resonate and accept each other. There were less than 200 cultivators, so there were only dozens of sword pellets. It was definitely not enough. However, most of the sword pellets were slowly moving, scattered all over the formation. Therefore, in reality, everyone had the opportunity to use their divine sense to probe the sword pellets above their heads. Everyone had the opportunity. The seniors had said very clearly that if you stood in place and waited, there would definitely be a sword pellet passing by. If you chased after it, there would be nothing. The sword pellets in their current state couldn't withstand too much obvious initiative from human cultivators. They were still somewhat restrained and afraid of strangers. Therefore, they could only wait for them to take the initiative. How could a cultivator's speed be faster than a sword pellet? In the history of Xianyuan, there have been cases of people who used brute force and didn't listen to advice. If they angered the sword pellets, it was very likely that they would injure the cultivator instead. If such a brainless act affected themselves and others, the formation master, Master Yuanying, would directly throw them out and permanently disqualify them from catching sword pellets. Chapter 185. But today, the sword pills were acting a little strange. According to their usual trajectory after releasing the sword pills, they would basically circle the array. But today's circle was missing a corner. They were only circling in the east, south, and north regions, but they didn't enter the west region. If they didn't approach, they wouldn't be able to communicate with the sword pills. Among the cultivators who were evenly distributed in the square, those who happened to be in the west region were a little anxious. The seniors had told them to wait, saying that the sword pills would definitely pass over their heads. But if they didn't come over now, were they supposed to just stand there in a daze? The entire capturing process only took 2 hours, so it was useless even if it took longer. If the sword pills didn't come over to the west region, what would they do? After waiting for less than 15 minutes, some impatient cultivators finally walked to other regions. At first, it was only one or two, because this kind of behavior wasn't permitted by host Yuanying. It could cause chaos among the cultivators, and they would be thrown out by a powerful cultivator. But when they walked over and the presiding cultivator didn't express any dissatisfaction, the remaining cultivators couldn't hold it in any longer and walked towards other areas. They walked very slowly, afraid that they would alarm the sword pellet group and anger the presiding nascent soul. The host Dharma name was Wenchang, and he was an old swordsman. He had presided over similar capturing of sword pills no less than 100 times. As there were more newcomers now, he basically held it once a month, so he couldn't be more familiar with the procedures. But he had never seen such a strange behavior from the sword pills. East, south, west, and north, but they didn't go to the west. Did the sword pills look at the almanac today, and the west was a great danger? Strange things happened every year, but the sword pills this year? Of course, this couldn't be blamed on the Foundation establishment cultivators below, so it was normal for them to move to other regions. It shouldn't be seen as disrupting the order. Lu Xiaoyi was among them. He was very dissatisfied. Gu Bei's words were really unreliable. He said that the sword pills would fly over his head, and then he could release his divine sense to see if he could communicate with them. If the sword pills slowed down, it meant that there was such a thing. It was like a group blind date. But the problem was that the ladies didn't come over at all. If the ladies didn't come over, he would go up. His current behavior was much more careful than before, and he didn't want to stick his head out. He waited until the first few cultivators had walked past without any danger, and the majority of the group had begun to move. Only then did he move with the flow. Was this cautious enough? Because they had moved late, most of the cultivators in the western district had gone to the southern and northern districts on the left and right. Thus, he and a dozen or so cultivators who had moved last went to the eastern district on the opposite side. They walked rather calmly, truly walking rather than flying over. He had wasted a little bit of time for nothing. Lu Xiaoyi felt depressed. Just as he was about to communicate with the sword pills that were passing by above, he was surprised to discover that the sword pills had changed their temperament after he came to the East District. They were now loitering around the North, West, and South Districts, but they didn't enter the East District. What the F***CK? What the hell is going on? Yuan Ying and Jean Dan, who were hosting the event, were just as depressed as the young Foundation establishment cultivators below. They frantically scanned the area with their divine senses, but couldn't find anything suspicious. Could it be that the sword pills released from the small world of the sword tomb had lost their sense of direction? Because of the frequent mistakes, the Foundation establishment cultivators below were also complaining. Some of them complained, but at least they knew how to control themselves and didn't dare to spout nonsense. There was no other way. This time, everyone was very proactive, and there was no need for anyone to probe. With anger in their hearts, the Foundation establishment cultivators quickly divided into 3 groups and began to move towards the northwest and south districts. However, this time, they weren't strolling leisurely, but running. There was no other way. If they didn't hurry, there wouldn't be enough time. The scene was already somewhat chaotic, but fortunately, it wasn't too obvious. This special phenomenon prevented the high-level cultivators hosting the event from taking action. What should they do? The Foundation establishment cultivators weren't wrong. Could it be that they had to fix these willful sword pills? Lu Xiaoyi resisted his irritation. He was one of the unluckiest few. From beginning to end, he didn't have the chance to come into contact with the sword pills. The others at least had some time to come into contact with them. Only the dozen or so people from the Western District to the Eastern District were the unluckiest. This time, when he went to the Southern District on the left, he was pondering, why did these damned little things seem to be deliberately avoiding me? Wherever he went, there was an empty space. Lu Xiaoyi had the temperament of a swindler. He had guessed correctly. Ever since he entered the Southern District, it had indeed become a forbidden zone for sword pills. And at this time, there weren't many people left who had been with him all the way from the Western District to the Eastern District and then to the Southern District. The scene was completely chaotic. Cultivators were running around, cursing, shouting for the competition to start again, and shouting that there was an inside story and unspoken rules. There was no end to it. Lu Xiaoyi was among them. He ran towards the north, and, as expected, the northern district banned flying. At this time, he finally understood a little. These sword pills seemed to be specifically targeting him. As long as he went, there would be no sword pills within a few hundred feet of him. He didn't dare to make a sound. This crime of disrupting normal order was something his small shoulders couldn't bear. Why don't I just sneak away and forget about it? It wasn't important whether or not he could get the sword pills. If he was taught a lesson by the host, or cut into pieces for research, that would be a big loss for a small gain. But just as he was about to retreat, a pressure descended on the square. All the Foundation establishment cultivators were pressed to the spot. Not to mention moving, even their fingers weren't their own. That was the host, Wen Chang's spiritual master. After such a long time, if he still couldn't see anything, then his yuanying was a dog's body. He hung in the air, frowning, and pointed at a Foundation establishment cultivator. You. I'm talking about you. What's your name? Lu Xiaoyi felt the pressure on his body disappear completely. He regained control of his body. Looking at the old man's finger, it seemed to be pointing in his direction. Thus, he naturally looked to both sides, as if he had nothing to do with it. When Chang's spiritual master was furious. A perfectly good event had turned into a mess. Complaints were everywhere. This instigator was actually farting and looking at others. A beam of light flashed, and the copper hairpin on Lu Xiaoyi's head was split in half. His black hair scattered. At that moment, everyone knew who Wen Chang's spiritual master was referring to. This included Taoist Gu Bei, who was watching the commotion. He had long been dumbfounded by the strange scene, but he never expected that the focus would be on the newcomer he was leading. When Chang's spiritual master shouted again, "Who are you?" Lu Xiaoyi couldn't avoid it. His expression changed as he struggled between madness and reason. But in the end, reason prevailed over madness. This madness left even him afraid. It was an impulse to kill a yuanying. A Foundation establishment cultivator killing a yuanying? Even a slightly normal person wouldn't think that way. But deep in his thoughts, he didn't seem to care about yuanying at all. It was as if the person shouting at him wasn't a perfected yuanying, but a dog. Occasionally, when he went crazy, he couldn't control himself. Lu Xiaoyi kept reminding himself in his heart as he forced a smile on his face. My way of thinking is very wrong. I will lose my life. Chapter 186. Generation Yin. Entered the sect 3 days ago. Brought here by Ancestor Cheng. His Dharma name is cigarette, but Wen Chang actually did not care about this. Head west now to the Western District. Lu Xiaoyi bowed stiffly and bent down to pick up the broken copper hairpin on the ground. He then slowly walked towards the Western District. Under everyone's incredulous gazes, his ordinary body seemed to be a devil to the sword pills. He was their natural enemy, a taboo. Not a single sword pill dared to approach within a few hundred feet of him. When he returned to the Western District, the sky above the Western District was empty. Wen Chang's voice continued. Continue walking. Circle the plaza once. Lu Xiaoyi walked silently. He did not understand. He wanted to keep a low profile, but why did he reveal himself in front of everyone? Why did he become the target of public criticism? This was not his fault. He could not control it all. He also wanted the sword pills to circle around him. One would not be too little, 100 would not be too much, but he could not do it. These sword pills did not listen to him either. They were like a plague. Wherever he went, the sword pills would hide. It was like they were playing hide-and-seek with him. The situation was very clear. There was no problem with the sword pills. The problem was with this small Foundation establishment. All the sword pills were avoiding him, which was why one of the 4 areas in the plaza was empty. It was because this fellow was standing there. When Chang appeared in front of him in a flash, he raised his hand and placed it on his head. Lu Xiaoyi only felt a warm current pour down, but he did not feel any discomfort. After a while, Wen Chang did not discover any abnormalities. There was no so-called strange aura. Furthermore, as a swordsman's weapon, The sword spirit was not afraid of any evil existence. He really could not understand. Therefore, he shouted outside, "Who was his guide?" Gubei stumbled in. Even though he had lived for more than 200 years, the number of times he had interacted with a nascent soul-perfected being could be counted on one hand. Yet, he did not expect to encounter such a situation in the end. "It's me, Gubei. I am a Taoist guide. Does Ancestor one have any instructions?" When Chang pointed at Lu Xiaoyi, "This cigarette, but were you the one who taught him these few days? Is there anything unusual?" Gubei shook his head firmly. Nothing unusual. He was just a bumpkin from a faraway, low-level cultivation world. He didn't even have a foundation establishment cultivation method. 5 days ago, he was brought back by Ancestor Chung and handed over to the visitation hall to handle the matter of joining the sect. This disciple has been in charge of receiving disciples in the Ascension Hall for 53 years and has received 496 new disciples. This disciple thinks that there's nothing wrong with him. When Changzhen didn't argue and made his decision. "Cigarette, but right? As you can see, the inner sword isn't suitable for you and the sword pill is avoiding you. Today, as an elder of the Primal Chaos Thunder Palace, I've made a decision to revoke your right to try the sword pill. Do you have any objections?" Lu Xiaoyi said bitterly, "No objections." Wen Changzhen waved his hand and said, "Go ahead. The external swordsmanship has great potential. We still have to continue capturing sword pellets, so it's not good for you to stay here." Gubei felt as if a huge rock had been lifted from his heart. Luckily, Wen Changzhen was very sensible. Otherwise, this brat would be in deep trouble if he were to be punished for disturbing the capture of the sword orb. Seeing that the kid was still standing there motionless, he couldn't help but give him a tug. "Still not leaving? Are you going to stay here and wait for others to treat you to a meal?" However, Lu Xiaoyi didn't move. He felt that there were some things that had to be made clear. "Ancestor one, right? I think there are some things that I have to make clear. The ones who pulled me from the faraway outer region of the universe to the fifth ring were you. The ones who said that I had to enter the sect in Xianyuan were you. The ones who made me come here to try the sword pill were you. Now, I've become the one who's deliberately causing trouble. It doesn't matter. There's no difference between an inner sword and an outer sword to me. But you shouldn't have cut off my hairpin. My deceased mother had personally selected and polished them for me. Cigarette, but we'll remember this slash." When Changzhen was stunned and then laughed loudly, "Good. I'll wait for you to return it." At the side, Gubei couldn't hold it in anymore. He circulated his magic power and pulled Lu Xiaoyi away while apologizing continuously. "When Changzhen, he's talking nonsense. This brat doesn't have any other problems, but he's stubborn. Please don't lower yourself to his level." Lu Xiaoyi was dragged out of the plaza by Gubei and thrown onto the flying boat. Then, they quickly left because Gubei couldn't figure out how much trouble this brat would cause if he left him there. Even with more than 200 years of cultivation, his mind was in a mess. He didn't know where he should bring this brat to relax his nerves. Thus, for the first time, he didn't choose a destination on his own. Instead, he asked a question. "Where do you want to go?" Lu Xiaoyi slumped on the flying boat, looking weak and powerless. "One tight and one fast is for cultivation. The formation just now scared me. Why don't we go to the place you mentioned yesterday, senior apprentice brother?" Gubei didn't say a word and drove the boat forward. What was this? He had just climbed out of the gates of hell, and now he wanted to see an entertainment venue? How did he manage to change his mind? Shouldn't he be immersed in cultivation right now and working hard to become stronger? There were no mortals in the Dome Peak. If one wanted to indulge in debauchery, they would leave the Dome Peak and go to the towns under the snowy mountains. There were many such towns surrounding the Dome Peak snowy mountains with a radius of tens of thousands of miles. There were more than 10 big and small cities in all directions and countless towns and villages. Because they were backed by the Xianyuan sword sect, of course, they relied on the mountains to live off the mountains and the rivers to live off the water. Almost all the towns had some kind of connection with cultivation, and each had its own characteristics. Because of the large number of cultivators' descendants in these towns, Their nature wasn't completely that of the mortal world. Here, cultivation wasn't a taboo, but the only supreme thing. In a place like the Fifth Ring, cultivators controlled everything. Countries like Lu Xiaoi's original world didn't exist. Although there were government offices, they were basically puppets of the sections. Around the Dome Peak, even this fig leaf didn't exist. Many of the places were directly controlled by cultivators. The place you want to go can be found in every city around the Dome Peak. There are also many bigger towns. That's why you don't have to deliberately search for them. The only thing you need to take note of is that some of them use spirit stones to settle the bill, and some of them use the mortal world's gold and silver. You need to ask them in advance. Gu Bei felt that he couldn't protect his integrity in his later years. He had been guiding newcomers for 53 years, and in the end, how did he become a pimp? It was really tiring. He just didn't want this somewhat unbearable but truly innocent young man to understand what a real Xian Yuan was, what a real swordsman was. Understood. Different customers naturally charge different prices. It's fair and reasonable. It's only right and proper. Foundation establishment was different from qi intake. The body's functions would undergo earth-shaking changes, and they could avoid certain private diseases. That's why, cigarette, but I'm warning you, in the cities around the Dome Peak snowy mountains, after 10,000 years, ordinary people related to cultivation and Xian Yuan can be found everywhere. Perhaps an old man pulling a rickshaw could become a Jin Dan Yuanying in a few dozen generations. Don't even talk about those big places, restaurants, gambling dens, brothels. Don't rely on your status as a foundation establishment cultivator to intimidate others, bully others, eat and dash, act like a tyrant. If you get beaten up later, no one will stand up for you. Remember, this isn't your original world. Tuck your tail between your legs. If you really can't tuck it, cut it. Chapter 187. Lu Xiaoi chuckled and nodded. This senior brother Gu Bei was too careful. Those people had already entered the mortal world, so what influence did they have? All right, I'll listen, senior brother. I'll just wander around outside and broaden my horizons. I won't go in. If senior brother has any familiar places, introduce them to me. We could go anywhere. Let's be familiar with each other. I've never been to a place like this. Gu Bei was truly vexed. He kept comforting himself by telling himself that he should just take it as a distraction. After all, one had to relax after being nervous. The scene at that time had really scared him to death. These vicious people with internal swords were ruthless and vicious. If they had attacked without any reason, they would have given this brat the reputation of being a spy. No one would have been able to say anything about it. But in the end, they did not go to a relaxing place. Gu Bei was only a foundation establishment cultivator after all. He was not on a sword, but on a flying boat for newcomers to sightsee. Thus, his speed was extremely limited. Before he had even left the snowy mountain area, a sword talisman had already caught up to him. He laughed bitterly. Let's go back. When Guangfeng Thunder Palace summoned us. Your matter is not over yet. Looks like when Zhu has reported this matter to the higher-ups. Lu Xiaoi was very regretful. I originally wanted to take this opportunity to meet a 5-ringed female hero. Now that it's over, I'm afraid there won't be another chance in the near future. This place is too big, it's troublesome. We have to fly for a few hours just to go out. Can't we just move the venue into the snowy mountain? Gu Bei shouted, cigarette butt. Don't take it lightly. Do you know what kind of place the Chaotic Thunder Palace is? It's the core of the Inner Sword sect. Those who work there are at least Yuanying realm cultivators. The palace master's cultivations are even higher. If there's even the slightest mistake, you'll be smashed to pieces. If you have the time to talk nonsense, why don't you think about how to block your big hole? He did not think that this cigarette but was completely innocent, but he did not think that it was malicious either. Every cultivator had their own secrets in the process of cultivation. He could understand if it was an unexpected opportunity. The problem was if this secret and opportunity were to harm Xian Yuan, the higher-ups would definitely suppress him. Xian Yuan had been cultivating for more than 200 years. He knew the style of his sect all too well. Lu Xiaoi really didn't care, because he didn't even know what his secret was. If these Xianyuan patriarchs could help him find it, he would have to thank them. Life-threatening? He didn't think anything would happen, when Changzhenren did not do anything to him at that time, so he roughly understood Xuanyuan's way of doing things. The higher one went, the less dangerous it would be. The danger would only come from below, in the future of cultivation. However, from Gu Bei's irritated tone, he could feel his senior brother's concern. He was lucky to have met such a kind person the moment he entered Xianyuan. Not everyone could be brave enough to pat their chest in front of Wen Changzhenren. The two returned in silence. Although Gu Bei hoped that the last rookie he received would be fine, he would not do anything that went against Xuanyuan's orders. Let this guy go. Impossible. Besides, where could he run to? Given his speed and the fact that his soul lamp was still in the Sword Soul Hall, there was no way he would be able to escape. More than 2 hours later, it was past noon, and it was already 3 in the morning. They were back at Wenguang Peak. Looking down from the flying boat, the square below, Wenguang Peak was empty. The capture of the sword pill had ended. Who knew how many people were happy and how many were sad? This had nothing to do with him. If he could successfully pass this stage, he would only end up as an external sword. It wasn't his concern who passed the internal sword. The Chaotic Thunder Palace was the highest palace in Xuanyuan's sword faction that managed the internal sword lineage. The swordsmen above the Yuaning no longer had any authority over them. They were all free and unfettered figures in the world, not bound by restrictions. Therefore, Foundation Establishment, Jindan, and Yuaning were the main management of the Thunder Palace. Of course, there were branches below them. Places like the Thunder Palace were usually only accessible to Jindan and Yuaning. As for Foundation Establishment, they were less qualified. There is also a palace with similar functions called the Sword Aura Rushing to the Heavens Pavilion. On Qinxiu Peak, it was the highest palace that managed the external sword lineage. Therefore, it wasn't suitable for Lu Xiaoyi to come here. He was destined to be an external sword cultivator. However, the two of them knew very well that the reason for asking him to come here was not because of which lineage he cultivated in. Xianyuan had a large number of internal sword cultivators who would have the patience to care about such trivial matters. Their only goal was to find out why the sword orb was avoiding him. Outside the Thunder Palace, Lu Xiaoyi was waiting outside in boredom. Gu Bei was the first to be called into the palace. This was very normal because Gu Bei was the only one who had been in contact with him for the longest time. For the past 5 days, they were practically inseparable. Sitting like a bell, standing like a pine tree, moving like the wind. Although cultivators never had such requirements, almost every cultivator could do this. This was a kind of demeanor, an attitude, and a respect towards cultivation. Lu Xiaoyi did not care about this. It wasn't like he was in some kind of situation where he liked to be casual. He sat down on the steps at the entrance of the Chaotic Thunder Palace and relaxed his body. These days, he had been walking too much. Although he could already fly, there were many places in Xianyuan where he couldn't fly. This was especially true for the places that Gu Bei had brought him to these days. They were very solemn, so he could only walk. Foundation Establishment cultivators naturally couldn't get rid of the smell of their feet and sweat. This was just a kind of habit, a habit that seemed to have come from his previous life. He always felt that this was a reward for his feet. It wasn't his feet that relaxed, but his mind. He didn't know how to survive in a sect, but he knew how to get along with people. The more he got into this kind of situation, the more he couldn't shrink back. If Xianyuan wasn't the kind of sect he imagined it to be, he actually didn't have any leeway to resist. He was only a Foundation Establishment cultivator, and nobody who was about to step onto the path of Tao. From the moment he stepped onto the flying boat towards Chaoguang, everything was already beyond his control. Perhaps a casual strike from a high-level cultivator who disliked him, perhaps a shooting star, or perhaps the aftermath of a fight between others would cause him to be unprepared and inexplicably lose his life. When an ant was moving in the mud, there were too many unforeseen circumstances that he couldn't guard against. Of course, he understood the importance of cowardice. However, he also understood that one couldn't be too cowardly. Otherwise, after a long time, cowardice would become true cowardice. When he understood that this sect was already inseparable from him, reason returned to his body. Did he really think that he could get away with it by pretending to be cowardly? These great cultivators had lived for thousands of years and had a good grasp of people's hearts. Instead of pretending to be cowardly, he might as well go to the Dafa. Perhaps the great cultivators would even think that his personality was more in line with that of a swordsman. This was also the reason why he dared to challenge Wenchangzhenren. It was easier for people to accept the stubbornness of a hothead. His mother's remains were very precious, but no matter what, it wasn't worth revenge. If one's yearning for her reached an extreme, it would be the beginning of a disaster. Gubei had told him a lot of stories about Xianyuan. It sounded grand and majestic, and now it was time to verify the authenticity of Gubei's boasting. Was it true? He didn't have much to prepare, because up until now, he hadn't hidden anything from Xianyuan. It was just a freak combination of factors. Originally, he wanted to stay here and be a long-lived rice worm, but he didn't expect that the moment he entered, the higher-ups would be alerted. For example, Gubei had been in Xianyuan for more than 200 years, but he hadn't spoken much with Yuanying. He hadn't even stepped through the door of the Thunder Palace. Now he was in full contact. An hour later, Gubei appeared at the door of the palace. He didn't look happy or sad, and only nodded at him. "You can go in. Don't be nervous." "Oh no, don't be impudent." Lu Xiaoyi smiled and didn't say anything. He stepped in, as if this wasn't Xuanyuan's inner sword palace, but some kind of brothel, and he was a rich man. This was a temperament that others couldn't learn. Some people could bend their backs, but some things would always be straight. Chapter 188. In the depths of the Thunder Palace, 3 Taoists sat casually. To them, such a gathering was rare because the current Xianyuan was no longer the original Xianyuan. The Thunder Palace Master, Taoist Zenith, perfected Lord. The Deputy Palace Master, Taoist Gong Cheng, perfected Lord. The Deputy Palace Master, Taoist Lu Feng, perfected Lord. The changes in the outside world could hardly affect their mood, but as the core of the sect, they valued the development of the internal sword lineage more than anything else, because this was the true source of Xuanyuan's power. The internal sword was no small matter. The sword orb was the lifeblood of the internal sword. Now that such a strange thing had happened to it, how could they let their guard down? This was the reason why Wenchang had directly sent a message to the Thunder Palace. The 3 perfected lords of the 5th ring had also come without hesitation, even if the other party was an ant-like foundation establishment cultivator. It wasn't that this ant had any destructive power, but rather, was there any other factor behind him? If there was some kind of power that the sword orb feared, this would have a profound impact on the internal sword lineage. It could even be said that 90% of the internal sword's combat power would be crippled. How could they be careless? Martial nephew Cheng, Gu He, Gu Gang, and now Gu Bei. The origin of this cigarette, but is basically clear. At the very least, from the moment he stepped on the floating raft 2 years ago, there was nothing to be suspicious about. The problem now is his past. If there is a problem, it must be in his original world. Perfected Lord Lu Feng deduced. Gongcheng agreed. From the analysis of the entire process, this person can't possibly be targeting the internal sword lineage of Xianyuan. Martial Nephew Cheng's selection did not include him. According to Martial Nephew Cheng, this person wants to go to Chaowang World and has no interest in the 5th ring. It was just an accident that caused him to replace us. It was unrealistic to set up such a complicated scheme that included hundreds of foundation establishment cultivators, Jindan, and Yuanying. In addition, ever since this person came to Xianyuan, he has been thinking of leaving the sect and learning Dharma cultivation. He didn't seem to be faking it either. If Martial Nephew Cheng hadn't favored him, he would have been expelled from Xianyuan a long time ago. If there really is a power that has researched some kind of method to restrain my Xuanyuan's inner sword lineage, they wouldn't have let a mere foundation establishment cultivator reveal his trump card. let alone in front of so many people when he was catching the sword pill. This meant that he was unaware of his own abilities. The correct way is to make a move in a large-scale conflict. What else can you achieve by doing this now other than making us wary? The two of them looked at the hall master, Taoist Zhizhong. However, Zhizhong did not seem to have any intention of being the hall master. Since you've already said it, what else can I say? Looking at his past, if there was nothing wrong with his past, then there could only be one possibility. This person was the reincarnation of a great cultivator. Moreover, he was a great cultivator who was hostile to Xin Yuan. He was a character who once made our inner sword sect tremble in fear. Speaking of which, Xin Yuan has been established for tens of thousands of years. Has there ever been such a character? Miyagi disagreed. Impossible. Even if he was the reincarnation of a mighty figure, it was impossible for him to make the sword pill fear him when he was just at Foundation establishment. What kind of person could do this? I suspect he might not even be the reincarnation of a half-immortal. I feel that we still don't understand the mysteries of the underworld. There's no commonality. Moreover, he could affect the sword pill that just came out of the sword tomb, but he might not necessarily be able to affect a sword pill that has been refined by a cultivator. Taoist Zhizhong sighed, but he wasn't unhappy because of other people's rebuttal, because this was also what he wanted to say. You see, you all understand. Why did you bring me back for such a trivial matter? A mere Foundation establishment cultivator might have been stained with a bit of mystery and had some peculiarities. In the cultivation world, this kind of thing happens every day. Similarly, this peculiarity will gradually disappear along with the growth of one's realm and cultivation. Moreover, there's a high probability that he won't be able to reach that step. Now you've captured me and told me that a person appeared and made the sword pill hesitate in front of him. The danger of the inner sword is slowly approaching. Who are you trying to fool? Even 13. That he can't make my sword pill fear him, right? Aren't you just trying to drag me here so that you two can run out and have fun? We've been friends for thousands of years. What's the point of that? Gong Cheng and Lu Feng looked at each other, but they didn't give in. This time, it was Lu Feng's turn. First of all, you can make such a judgment, but we can't. This is the rules set by the ancestor. Anything related to the inheritance of the inner sword, no matter how big or small, must be decided by the Thunder Palace master. Even a dog can melt the sword pill. Secondly, how long has it been since you went to the Thunder Palace? 300 years? 500 years? If we didn't drag you here, who knows where you'd be wandering in the universe by now, right? And you still don't know about our friendship of thousands of years? Is this how friendship is used? We'll stand on duty for you and let you have fun. Just as the three of them were about to go up, a figure flashed outside. A Taoist with a sword on his back appeared openly in the most secretive place of the Thunder Palace. Gong Cheng was very dissatisfied. Old Gong Yao, is the Thunder Palace a place where swordsmen like you can enter? Believe it or not, I'll sue you for disrespect for trespassing. The swordsman didn't care. Sue, go now. Casually tell everyone that the three Thunder Palace masters are pushing the blame and wrangling with each other, favoring each other. Zhizhong snorted. Gong Yao, why aren't you at your sword chi soaring pavilion taking care of those good-for-nothing disciples of yours? Why have you come to my Thunder Palace? We have important matters to attend to, so it's not convenient for us to receive guests. Please go ahead. Gong Yao found a place to sit. You still know that this is the Thunder Palace? Which part of me is the soaring pavilion? I just want to know, what right does your Thunder Palace have to interrogate my outer sword disciples? If you casually fabricate a crime, wouldn't my outer sword lineage have to suffer in silence for no reason? There are two paths. Either you go to my soaring pavilion for a joint trial, or you stay here and watch the court, or you don't leave. Lu Feng came out to smooth things over. Calm down, calm down. Watch the court if you want. At our level, since we've already captured him, what can we do to him? At most, we'll just ask him some questions and go through the motions. Before he could finish, Taoist Zhizhong was already biting everyone he could. Lu Feng, stop pretending to be a good person. Do you think I don't know? The three of you are preparing to go out and do something, right? You're still acting in front of me. Even if you don't stick out your butt, I'll know what shit you're spouting. They had been friends for thousands of years. Usually, they had to maintain their poise and dignity in front of others, but in private, they were very casual with each other. There weren't many opportunities for them to be so relaxed. The conflict between them was that everyone wanted to go out. However, Xianyuan had to be guarded by someone, so there was endless filth. However, this filth was built on thousands of years of friendship. It started with a war of words and ended with a war of words. At their level, there weren't many people who could scold them. As for this matter, it was really a small reason that couldn't be any smaller. It was just a catalyst for everyone to gather. Would the perfected lords be worried about what kind of influence a small foundation establishment cultivator would have on Xianyuan in the future? If perfected lords were to think like this, they would die of exhaustion sooner or later. Chapter 189. To Lu Xiaoyi and Gu Bei, a storm that couldn't be bigger than this was nothing in the eyes of the higher-ups. This was something that was determined by one's realm and was inevitable. When Lu Xiaoyi walked in, he naturally saw the situation. He didn't utter a word and didn't even know how to greet them. He didn't even know how to address them. He had already respectfully addressed the Taoist master Yuanying as his ancestor. Then what about those above the Yuanying? He might as well not address them. Gongcheng was amiable. Their prestige grew when they met a strong opponent. What was there to show off in front of a small foundation establishment cultivator from their own sect? This was also a tradition of Xianyuan, a tradition of swordsmen. There was once an ancient swordsman who fought with a mortal over a single plank bridge. The two faced each other, and neither was willing to give way. That ancient swordsman had a stubborn temper. He didn't use any tricks and just wasted 3 days until the mortal got off the bridge. This wasn't a method that was advocated. It was a philosophy of swordsmen. We know about your matter. We don't blame you, but due to a free combination of factors, you did cause chaos when you were capturing the sword pill. So we have to get to the bottom of this. We can be at ease, and you can be at ease. What we're worried about is that something happened without you knowing. This is something that runs through your growth, and not just after you start cultivating the Tao. I don't think you want to be influenced by something inexplicable. Although the possibility is very small, it is necessary to look at your past. Xianyuan has never asked his disciples to confess all their secrets. This is your right. But when it comes to the possibility of affecting the foundation of the sword sect, we won't learn from that saint and deceive ourselves. You can refuse, but in the future, Xianyuan will probably impose some restrictions on you. If you agree, then everyone here can guarantee that no matter what we discover, we will keep it a secret for you and won't affect your development in the outer sword sect. Cigarette, butt, right? Make your choice. It was very tactful and also very unyielding. But it had to be said that what they said was very reasonable. Since it had happened, they just had to deal with it. There was no need to be stuck there because of some plot. I accept. But no matter what you find, good or bad, I have the right to know. Gongcheng smiled. Of course, we don't want our disciples to live in ignorance. Taoist Lifeng took out something and whispered, "Close your eyes, relax, breathe." The more relaxed you are, the faster this process will be and the less harmful it will be to your mind. Lu Xiaoyi unconsciously sank into his memories. His spirit was like a piece of paper in front of these people. It wasn't that he was weak, but that he had come to a place he shouldn't have and met people he shouldn't have met. To him, it was like a dream. It was very long and also very short. But in the eyes of the 4 true sovereigns, it was only a short moment. Their extremely powerful divine senses were enough to find what they were concerned about in this fast-paced rhythm. But the result was that there was nothing worthy of suspicion. This was the struggle of a small rogue cultivator in a remote, low-level world of cultivation. There were tears, bitterness, and even more blood. Taking advantage of the fact that he had yet to fully recover, the Supremes conversed with each other. A good seedling. If the sword pill doesn't reject him, I'm willing to give him 10 chances to capture the sword pill. His killing method is very straightforward, and he didn't kill an innocent person. Martial nephew Chung has good taste, but it's a pity that old man Gong Yao took advantage of him. Lufeng also felt that it was a pity. He's a natural killer. I'm guessing that his previous life had an influence on the present world. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so experienced. Gong Yao, I'll leave him to you. Maybe he'll be a good helper for your external sword in the future. He'll definitely be better than those useless disciples of yours. You have to watch over him carefully. Don't ruin him in the midst of internal strife. Gong Yao had a smile in his eyes, but he didn't fall for it. What do you mean ruin him in the midst of internal strife? If he has the ability to do so, he definitely won't be ruined. I think he's very likely to be ruined by your so-called concern. Is such a person worthy of being watched over? I don't see you watching over those with potential in your internal sword. You're lying to me because you don't want an external sword that can threaten your internal sword, right? Don't worry. From today onwards, he'll be the most ordinary disciple of the external sword lineage. He won't receive any care. I'll even create some obstacles for him. It's fine if he can't climb up, but if he does, I'll make your internal sword suffer sooner or later. The three internal sword cultivators couldn't help but laugh and scold him. Did they really care that this person would pose a threat to the internal sword lineage? How was that possible? It didn't exist. When Lu Xiaoyi woke up, he still couldn't figure out the identities of the four great cultivators in front of him. He didn't want to know either. There was a great disparity between their identities. A chicken could talk to a duck, but an insect couldn't talk to a tiger. Gong Yao didn't want to reveal his identity and make the little foundation establishment feel that he had something to rely on, so the internal sword cultivator was the one who made the final decision. Gong, Chung said lightly, "We didn't find anything. It might be some kind of mystery." This is also common in the cultivation world, so it won't affect you. Of course, if you feel that something is wrong one day, you can directly look for your senior master and martial uncle. Congratulations on becoming a member of the glorious Xian Yuan external sword lineage. In addition, I personally support you in challenging Wen Chong one day. Lu Xiaoyi didn't know what to say, but he was very clear that he should leave. He bowed to the four of them again, then turned around and walked out. After walking a few steps, he turned back. Seniors, since this disciple has been wrongly accused and has been interrogated so much, can I make a small request? Gong Chung didn't care. Say it. Lu Xiaoyi was very direct. This disciple's name? It's very indecent. I suspect that when they were choosing the characters, they made this disciple want to learn the Dharma. I just want to change it. It's fine if they draw lots again. No. The four Supremes were united for the first time. Seeing Lu Xiaoyi walk out as relaxed as he had walked in, Gu Bei finally relaxed. Although he trusted his sect, when things came to a head, he was always worried that all kinds of accidents would happen. But now, without any accidents, the sect was just and selfless as he had always been. Let's find a city where you can relax. I suddenly remembered that a senior brother who was passionate about this mentioned a place to me. Lu Xiaoyi sighed. The current him was somewhat different from before. A riceworm also had a desire to live. This time, he had passed smoothly, but what about the next time? You can't always entrust your safety to others' justice. Senior brother, I remember you saying that if you choose a direction, then you can choose a cultivation method or a sword technique. Now that I'm like you, a glorious Xianyuan external sword, then I can choose a cultivation method, right? Where is it? Thousand Elegance Peak Bo Ao Restaurant. Chapter 190. If Wenguang Peak was the core of the inner sword sect, then the core of the outer sword sect was the Thousand Virtues Peak. Regardless of whether it was the Sword Chi Soaring Heaven Pavilion, the Ascension Hall, or the Boa Tower, especially the latter two, they were the places most frequently visited by Foundation establishment cultivators. One could imagine what a university library with over 20,000 university students was like. The key point was that there were basically no people here who were just idling around. No one would assign you a job, and no one would guarantee your safety. Whether you could stand out or not depended entirely on your own self-awareness. The Boa Tower was located on the secondary peak of the Thousand Virtues Peak. It was not a single tower, but a cluster of buildings. Otherwise, it would not be able to satisfy the daily needs of over 20,000 people. Even in the cultivation world, if thousands of people entered and exited a single building at the same time, it would cause a lot of trouble for the manager. Fan Tower is isolated. Boa Tower is filled with 9 mysteries. Of the 9 buildings on the secondary peak of the Thousand Virtues Peak, the most books are over 10,000 and the least are over 3,000. They are all in the category of middle and low-level disciples. Apart from the Jinan stage ones that you can't look at, most of the others are in the category of foundation establishment. You are qualified to have any of them. There are no restrictions, no conditions, and no price. Gu Bei sighed as he looked at the 9 buildings in front of him. A sense of pride welled up in his heart. This is Xianyuan. This is the greatest benefit. This is the reason why the cultivators outside are crying and shouting to join. Someone once estimated that even if you skimmed through all the books here, it would take at least 10 years, just like reading a historical biography. It's easy to imagine how many scrolls there are here and how wide the scope is. This is a famous library in the 5th ring. Lu Xiaoyi keenly understood the meaning behind his words. Senior Martial Brother means that in the 5 rings, there are even more books than Xianyuan. Gu Bei knew that he had misspoken. He curled his lips and said disdainfully, and we can barely be ranked in the top 10 in the 5 rings. In front of us are Supreme, 3 pure ones, Garen, Myriad Scenery, Chiman Duanjia, and so on. They have even more books. I heard that Supreme and 3 pure ones have more than 10 million books in their libraries. But you don't know, those books are just there to make up the numbers. Only a small number of books are used to make up the numbers. So what if they have a lot of books? If a fight really breaks out, won't they just bow their heads obediently? Lu Xiaoyi had long since gotten used to Gu Bei stepping on and praising him. This Gu Bei was hopeless. It was as if Xianyuan was the center of the 5 rings and the center of the universe. For low-level cultivators, it might not be a problem, but for high-level cultivators to be so arrogant, it might not be a good thing. If everyone in Xianyuan thought so, then it meant that this sect was going through a period of glory, but it also meant that after the glory, there would be an inevitable decline. But he would not refute. Everyone had the right to love, and it was obvious that Gu Bei was supported by this love. Senior brother, there has to be an index, right? He couldn't just blindly search through the books one by one, right? Actually, I feel that things like martial arts and sword arts are more important for quality than quantity. If there are too many, it will make it difficult for one to make a choice. If one's willpower is slightly weaker, wouldn't it be like a bear choosing a stick? Gu Bei smiled. At least you have some knowledge. He even knew that cultivators should abstain from greed. However, even though there are close to 100,000 books here, and you can choose from every book, the sect has a limit on the number of books you can choose. With your current status as a new disciple, the limit is 1 martial art book, 3 sword arts books, and 5 other books. Every 10 years, there will be another 3 chances. When you reach 100 years old, the restrictions will be completely lifted. However, when cultivators reach that age, they all understand the fact that quantity cannot replace quality. Thus, no one will choose more. Looking at the 9 tall buildings in front of him, Lu Xiaoyi was still a little excited. Gu Bei probably wasn't bragging. No matter what, he would soon be free of the awkwardness of being a cultivator who couldn't cultivate. Senior brother, which building are we going to? I want to choose a martial art book first. Do you have any recommendations? The kind that has quick effects, hurts when hit, and can increase one's power, even when sleeping? Once they were familiar with each other, Senior Brother Gu Bei was a practical person. Don't be anxious, don't be anxious. We're already here, what's there to be anxious about? This place is open day and night, so there's plenty of time. However, there are some things that I must explain to you in advance so that you won't waste time. The two of them were very relaxed now because they had overcome a crisis and were finally back in a rhythm that they could control. It was not like the awkward situation when they were facing a nascent soul true lord where their lives were in the hands of others. Gu Bei explained, of the 9 tall buildings, the first one is called Heaven's AO Tower. It specializes in storing martial arts books. There are more than 5,000 martial arts books, including 23 Great Tao martial arts books. There are more than 400 martial arts books that are derived from Great Tao martial arts books. The rest are self-created by Xianyuan swordsmen or obtained from other places. Lu Xiaoyi laughed. I was wondering why there were so many. So there were only 23 that were self-created. The other 400 were copied from Lin Ma, and the rest were simply snatched from all over the universe. These words were very sarcastic, but it was basically the truth. However, in the cultivation world, was snatching martial arts books considered snatching? If they were only counted as self-created martial arts books, Xianyuan probably wouldn't even have a single one left. It was probably the same for the other sects. A large collection of martial arts books in the world. Seeing that Gu Bei didn't say anything, Lu Xiaoyi also knew that this joke was a little too much. Senior apprentice brother, what you mean is that Xianyuan disciples only have 23 martial arts books to choose from, and the rest are just for reference? When their cultivation deepens in the future, or when they encounter some difficult problem, or when they need to cooperate with a certain sword technique, they can learn the rest. Gu Bei sighed. This kid was very talented and smart. With just a few words, he understood a principle that many people couldn't understand even after a few years. Exactly. Actually, there are less than 23. Among them, there are a few that can be used with both inner and outer swords. There are 17 that are completely suitable for outer swords. All of them lead directly to Great Tao, and all of them have their own systems. In other words, after you form your core, there will be a follow-up. After Yuanying, there will be further study, and all the way up until the entire system is complete and complete. There won't be any detours, and it won't be a waste of time. This is the foundation of a large sect. If it were a small sect, they wouldn't know when their next meal would be after this meal. It would be a waste of time to adjust and find ways to change. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Then what about the other books? Gu Bei continued. The second tower is called the Sword Turtle Tower. As the name suggests, it's where sword techniques are stored. It's also the tower with the most collection out of the 9 towers. There are more than 12,000 types of sword techniques here. Among them, there are more than 1,000 that have been passed down from our sect tradition. There are more than 7,000 that have been refined and improved by the various seniors during their cultivation. There are also more than 3,000 that have been collected from all over the world. These sword techniques are different from cultivation techniques. Often, they're more powerful after being improved. After all, there are countless swordsmen in Xianyuan, and all of them are extremely talented. Who doesn't have 1 or 2 unique skills? If they're presented in the Sword Turtle Tower, they'll also be able to leave a name for themselves in the Swordsman Legacy. They can't be changed randomly. They have to go through actual combat and the test of time. Every sword technique has been thoroughly refined, and they strive for perfection. It's the same for the sword techniques collected from outside. If they're not of sufficient quality or power, they won't be able to enter. Therefore, among the 9 towers of Bo Ao, the Sword Turtle Tower is the best. You won't be able to find a more profound and extensive collection of sword techniques in the 5th ring. Chapter 191. Lu Xiaoyi believed in this point. There were countless ways to cultivate, and it was impossible for a sect to be the best in every aspect. There were always strengths and weaknesses. For Xianyuan, swordsmanship was his main strength, but he didn't know what else he was good at. Gu Bei continued. The 3rd tower is called Feng Ao Tower. Swordsman's strength lies in swordsmanship and escape techniques. Feng Ao Tower is the escape technique tower. It has more than 3,000 escape techniques and is one of the best in the 5th ring. Especially in the various escape techniques of swordsmanship, it is unparalleled and can be ranked in the top 3. It is on par with the Qimen Duanjia. Speed and swordsmanship? Yes, a very practical combination. Lu Xiaoyi had experienced this himself. He had done this when he faced off against the Red Line Alliance in the Gobi Desert. The 4th tower is called Mountain Ao Tower. It is the direction of strengthening one's body. You can also see it as a classification of body cultivators. Of course, we don't put too much emphasis on it. When we emphasize on strengthening one's body, we place more emphasis on speed. This is actually a bit contradictory. It all depends on the cultivator's choice. Do you want to be more resistant, or do you want to run faster? The fifth tower is called Cloud AO Tower. It is a supplement. A cultivator's cultivation must be supported by spells. The sword is a weapon for killing and fighting, but cultivation is not only about fighting. There are many other things. Even fighting includes many other practical aspects, such as perception, stealth, concealment, and so on. It is a necessity for a well-rounded swordsman. There are also alchemy, array, talisman, medicine, divination, and so on. These are all paths that can be achieved independently. Xianyuan does not have much knowledge in these areas. He belongs to the lower middle level in the entire fifth ring. But we still provide the most basic skills to satisfy everyone's preferences. The sixth building was the vast turtle building, which was a building for miscellaneous studies. It was about the universe, the five rings, Zhuizhou, as well as the five rings' 10,000 years of history, people, biographies, history, geography, culture, and everything else. It had a collection of over 1 million books. They were real books and not cultivation techniques. A cultivator, in the process of growth, was bound to come into contact with these things. It was better to read books than to enter closed-door cultivation. A cultivator's own knowledge, insight, and knowledge would be greatly improved. You couldn't travel through the entire universe, but you could at least understand this world and this universe through the eyes of countless seniors. So, even though it's a miscellaneous subject, it's actually a compulsory one. It just depends on which aspect you like. Lu Xiaoyi sighed in amazement as he listened. He, who was born in a small place, had slowly begun to accept Su Anyuan's strength. He no longer rolled his eyes at him because he was forced to come here. A small ant looking down on a giant dragon was also a strange mentality. However, in the past few days, he had finally straightened out his mentality. This was due to the stimulation from the sword pill incident, Su Anyuan's unquestionable strength, and Gu Bei's serious guidance. Some people were powerful in cultivation, but they couldn't become a teacher. Some people could become a teacher, but they couldn't make any progress in cultivation. Gu Bei was probably the latter. It was his luck to have met Gu Bei. He couldn't assume that just because he was a guide instructed by a sect, that everyone could do this. Lu Xiaoyi understood this in his heart, but he didn't have anything to repay Gu Bei. Therefore, he didn't say anything. Some things were clear in one's heart. It was enough to find an opportunity to do it. There was no need to talk about it all the time. He wasn't such a person. The seventh tower, Fighting AO Tower. The books on the first floor are a type of book. They contain the characteristics of the cultivation techniques of the various sects in the fifth ring, their mystic arts, secret arts, powerful figures, and organization structures. It's not just about the fifth ring, but also about the star fields they passed through in the past 10,000 years. It also includes those between orthodoxies, such as the sword vein and other branches of Taoism, the orthodox, as well as Buddhism and other special orthodoxies, such as body cultivators, soul cultivators, ghostly cultivators, and so on. The purpose of this is to know yourself and know your enemy. When you go out and meet with other sects and factions, you have a basic understanding of your opponent. It's not like you're blind. Understanding your opponent in battle isn't beneficial to a swordsman's performance. The eighth tower, Fighting AO Tower. Just from a name, you can tell that everything here belongs to Jin Dan. Foundation establishment cultivators don't have a right to go up there. The ninth tower, Fighting AO Tower. It's mysterious and unknown. Anyway, I don't know about it. I've never entered it before. If you want to know, you'll have to work hard yourself. Lu Xiaoyi felt like his head was about to explode. As a person who is used to eating vegetables and tofu for a meal, how was he supposed to choose when faced with tens of thousands of delicacies, including those that flew in the sky, swam in the water, crawled on the ground? He hadn't even entered the tower yet, but he was already stunned. Gu Bei smiled proudly. In his career as a guide, most of the people who joined Xianyuan because they admired him. Most of them were natives from Zhuizhou and the fifth ring. They understood Xuanyuan's strength and knew about Xuanyuan's deeds. so there was no need to say much. They were very devout. However, there were also those who were unconvinced. There were all kinds of birds in the forest. They were clearly sh*t, but they looked down on the tall buildings. They basically came from the fifth ring's continuous battles in the universe. They used all kinds of tricks and robberies. In fact, they were sold as slaves. One could imagine how much resistance they had in their hearts. Even if they appeared to be well-behaved and docile, almost everyone had a rebellious heart buried in their hearts. When I grow up and become an immortal, I'll deal with the fifth ring's group of bandits. This was the innate nature of humans. They didn't see the fifth ring and Xuanyuan's strength and throw themselves at him and call him daddy. Humans were the most rebellious race, especially cultivators. They also used this kind of thinking as a motivation to move forward. However, time would change everything. When they truly grew up, they would discover that what they had gained in Xianyuan was far more than what they had lost in the beginning. And cultivation was a profession that didn't pay attention to one's background. When cultivators grew up, they learned to weigh gains and losses. They didn't consider problems based on the likes and dislikes of their youth. Their thoughts were swayed. In addition to Xuanyuan's unique charm of a sect, their initial resistance would become weaker and weaker until they completely disappeared and became a true Xianyuan person. This was what guides like them had to do, although what they did was only the beginning of this long process. For example, right now, this kid was dumbstruck in front of Xuanyuan's gradually revealed strength. This was a kind of fundamental change, a kind of gradual acceptance of Xuanyuan's changes. He knew that this kid was far from being loyal to Xianyuan right now, but he also knew that if this kid could continue walking down this path, he would definitely become a loyal guard of Xianyuan like him. This was the significance of being a guide. It was hard work, but it was also enjoyment. The seeds he planted now would one day grow into a towering tree, even if he might not be able to see it. This was his belief. He relied on this to live, and he obtained great satisfaction from it. Chapter 192. I know you're confused now. As someone who has been through this, I will give you some advice at the first pavilion, the Heaven's AO Technique Pavilion. That is all. You can only choose for the rest, whether it is right or wrong. It is actually a part of cultivation. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Cultivation techniques were the foundation of a cultivator's cultivation. Without this, everything was in vain. The 23 techniques of the Heaven's AO sect are actually born out of the 7 supreme Great Tao techniques. Not only the outer sword, but the techniques of the inner sword family are also the same. If you are lucky enough to cultivate all the way up, in the end, everyone will be reunited on these 7 supreme Great Tao techniques. This is the system. As for which 7, I won't say. It will only confuse you. Seeing Lu Xiaoyi's expression, he added, well, I actually don't have access to these either. However, I have heard of them in the Foundation establishment realm. Cigarette, but don't laugh. If you laugh again, I will beat you up. Lu Xiaoyi tried his best to hold back his laughter. Senior brother Gu Bei was a kind person. He was just used to bragging, and trampling on others. You could have just said that it was a Foundation establishment technique. Why do you have to talk about the supreme Great Tao techniques? You don't even know about it. You are embarrassed. Who can you blame? Gu Bei quickly regained his composure. The difference between the inner and outer swords is never in terms of techniques, but in terms of swordsmanship. Actually, it is not in terms of swordsmanship, but in terms of the medium. The sharpness of the sword ball is incomparable to our outer sword's flying sword. Therefore, with the same cultivation and the same swordsmanship, our outer sword is different from the inner sword. The difference cannot be made up. When the two of them were familiar with each other, Gu Bei did not hide the disadvantages of the outer sword. They would know about it sooner or later. Since this kid had entered the outer sword lineage, there was no need to hide it. However, the origins of the techniques are all the same. Among the 23 techniques, 6 can be used both inner and outer swords. 17 are exclusive to the outer sword. Don't underestimate the differences. The inner sword uses force on the Naiwan. while the outer sword uses force on the entire body. Each has its own emphasis. The total amount of magic power and spirit is there. It is impossible to take care of all aspects. If you take care of the Naiwen, you will damage the entire body. So, the outer sword lineage is chosen from the 17 techniques. This was a right path. Even if you have the chance to fuse with the sword pellet in the future, you can just cultivate the inner sword technique. You can't do both at the same time. Since you want to take care of one side, you don't want to give up the other. Lu Xiaoyi nodded. Are there any differences between these two methods of exerting force? Gu Bei sighed. The difference is huge. The sword pellet was stored in a cultivator's mud pill palace. Every day, it was immersed with the spirit. It could be said to be an extension of the arm and the continuation of the consciousness. Therefore, when the inner sword was released, it was innately superior to the outer sword in terms of control. On top of that, the inner sword was not afraid of being damaged, contaminated, or stained with filth. He could use it as he wished without any scruples. External swords were different. One had to consider the environment in which the flying sword was used, whether or not the flying sword was seized by the opponent, whether or not it was bound, contaminated, damaged. How many swords could the sword case contain? How many swords could a cultivator refine in their lifetime? A single sword strike could be of high quality, but the quantity would be limited. He pursued quantity, but he could improve the quality of his flying swords. He couldn't have both. Unlike the inner sword pellet, it shrank in the mud pill palace and never came out. Therefore, the flying swords it released were endless, and their might was still at its peak. Comparing the two, the lineage of the outer sword was at a huge disadvantage. The two had unknowingly digressed from the topic, but neither of them cared. It had been like this for the past few days, talking about whatever came to mind. Does the outer sword have no advantage at all? Gu Bei gave a wry smile. Of course, there are areas where the inner sword can't compare. For example, the range of the outer sword is further than the inner sword. The sword beam of the inner sword was formless and formless, so it would definitely be damaged in the process of flying. The further it flew, the weaker it would be. Therefore, it had the greatest effective range. The outer sword was different. In theory, as long as you could control it, the flying sword could fly forever. A flying sword could kill enemies hundreds of kilometers away. That was the ideal state of the outer sword. However, it was difficult to control it. It was useless if the consciousness couldn't keep up. Therefore, the advantage of the outer sword was limited by the consciousness, so it only existed in theory. In practice, regardless of whether it was the effective range of the inner or outer sword, it was within the range of the consciousness. Therefore, there was no difference in strength. Another reason why the outer sword was better than the inner sword was that the outer sword was stronger than the inner sword. The sword was heavy. The force was overwhelming. Moreover, this advantage could be continuously expanded by refining restrictions. However, the more restrictions there were, the less nimble it would be. When a cultivator reached the Jindan realm, their consciousness would explode and they would be able to split the sword beam. Then the awkwardness would come. The more restrictions there were, the harder it would be to split them. It would be like a piece of ordinary iron that could instantly split into thousands of sword beams on the path of cultivation. There are obstacles everywhere. If you take care of one, you will lose the other. A cultivator's cultivation is like walking on a tightrope. The most important problem is how to balance it. This is something that only each person can grasp. The seniors can only give a rough idea. As for the specifics, you can only figure it out yourself. Lu Xiaoyi humbly listened to the advice, but did not speak in human language. He was really treating his senior brother as one of his own. Senior brother, you digressed again. If you continue talking like this, the topic will be diverted. I'm afraid that I won't even be able to see what the cultivation technique is like in a month. Gu Bei glared at him. This brat was treating his good intentions as ill intent. However, it did seem like he had gone too far. Even someone as strong as a perfected lord could not solve these problems after tens of thousands of years. What was the point of their discussion? He quickly dismissed this brat. He had led hundreds of newcomers. But this was the first time he had encountered such trouble. He was mentally exhausted. There are 17 cultivation techniques suitable for the external sword lineage. Each of them has its own emphasis. Some walk the traditional path, some borrow the power of the stars, some focus on the inner spirit, some start from the 5 elements, and some start from lightning. It all depends on how you choose. When you reach the Jindan realm, there will naturally be corresponding cultivation techniques for you to cultivate. There will always be cultivation techniques for you to cultivate. This is a system. During this process, there will be countless supplementary cultivation techniques, sword techniques, and secret techniques to complement it. Cultivating in this way will be the key to the Xianyuan swordsman's unstoppable journey in the world. Lu Xiaoyi thought about it carefully. He was not an arbitrary person. He knew that in the real cultivation world, he was a rookie who did not know anything. At this stage, he did not have the ability to make his own decisions. The experience of his seniors was very important. Senior brother, what advice do you have? Your junior brother is all ears. Gu Bei smiled. Now that's a satisfactory attitude. Every cultivation technique has its own uniqueness. There is no distinction between high and low. In the eyes of a cultivator, the only thing that matters is whether it is compatible with them. However, this kind of thinking is actually limited. The so-called compatibility is actually more important for the future. You are just a small foundation establishment cultivator now. In terms of compatibility, there are not many choices. For example, spirit or lightning. Are these things compatible with you now? Therefore, in my opinion, instead of guessing what path you should take in the future, what path is the most suitable for you? It is better to build a good foundation first. Under the premise of building a good foundation, you can slowly search for the path that is most suitable for you. This is the right path. What is the foundation? I believe that tradition and the 5 elements are the foundation. It will never be outdated in a cultivator's future cultivation. You can choose traditional cultivation, or you can start from the 5 elements. According to the attributes of your 5 elements, you can determine your initial direction. Lu Xiaoyi scratched his head. 5 elements? I don't seem to be too clear about my 5 elements. That you're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.